Chapter 620. The morning sun was soft, and the night wind was still blowing. It was the moment before everything recovered, but the pursuit had already begun. After leaving the mountain range, the tens of thousands of pursuers changed their previous aggressive advance. Instead, they sent a large number of cavalry to the left wing, directly blocking the escape route in that direction. This posture undoubtedly forced Lan Shah and the others to escape to the right, and the right side was where the dense tribes were. Obviously, as Lan Shah expected, Anna had already sent people to the tribes to block Lan Shah's escape route, intending to encircle them like wrapping dumplings. This was an open conspiracy. Even if Lan Shah and the others were aware of this sinister intention, they had no other choice but to retreat to the right. However, Anna and the others did not know that the team being driven away was not nervous at all. On the contrary, their mentality was very relaxed. "Leader, do you think this will work?" After pulling away again, Andre asked while holding a wooden stick as thick as an arm. Tribal seals are mostly square, about 2 inches in length and breadth. This one meets the requirements. But, touching his chin, Lan Shah pointed at someone who was squatting on the ground not far away, pondering something. His expression was a little strange. He said that the cross-section of wood has burrs, and polishing is a waste of time. So it's best to find some plants, such as radishes. Well, what's a radish? Andre shook his head blankly. Well, maybe it's a brand species. In short, just tell everyone to find some slightly softer plants. Okay. Watching Andre turn and leave, Lan Shah looked at someone again. His expression was a little absent-minded, and then he shook his head. Although some words were a little arrogant and a little boring, Lan Shah knew that his wisdom was superior, especially in the perfect control of the overall situation. Maybe this was a talent, or maybe it was inherited. After all, his mother was also very smart. But no matter what, this was an indisputable fact. As for examples, even in the past, when he fought with Teacher and Shuai, he often won more than he lost. But not long ago, when the brand said, "Why don't we carve it ourselves?" she realized that she had been absent-minded. When she came back to her senses, she knew that the tactical plan that she had been formulating in her mind for a long time had collapsed in an instant. There was no need to take risks and sneak into the various tribes. No need to waste the little time they had, and no need to make arrangements to deal with the possible changes that might occur. His words hit the nail on the head. The benefits were obvious. After some random thoughts, Lan Shah pursed his lips and walked over. Making fake seals. Perhaps this was the impression that the northern wilderness tribes had of the brand. All brand people were crafty and cunning. He as expected, it's true. But in fact, although Lan Shah's thoughts weren't wrong, he had indeed wronged Brand's people this time. Little did she know that a certain someone was not from the brand at all, and this idea could not be considered creative or inspired, because in a certain magical world, in the streets and alleys, one could almost see invoices, seals, certificates, knockout powder, black guns. Contact, Miss Bow. Phone, XXXXX. Hey, Brand's people, call me by my name. All right, Mr. Arthur, what do you think of my work this time? After hesitating for a while, Shini still excitedly held up the carved wood. She couldn't wait to ask. Tang lifted his head from the book full of totems and stared at the cross-section of the wood for a while. He asked tentatively, Rat? Shini's excited expression instantly collapsed. She curled her lips and angrily said, "This is clearly a tiger. A tiger, all right." Tang touched his forehead when he heard what she said and pretended that he could not bear to look at her. Then he shrugged his shoulders as Sydney looked like she was about to go berserk. "Sorry, this is really a little abstract." "Well, at least I guessed one word right? Yes, keep up the good work. Keep up the good work." Getting one word right? How can that count? Rat tiger, wasn't that just getting one word right? After Shini reacted, she snorted. She lifted her head and saw Lan Shah walking over. She immediately became spirited and grabbed the wood as if it was a treasure. "Ha, leader, look. What do you think this looks like?" Let me give you a hint. It's not a rat. That's a cat." Shini, what's with your expression?" Haha, this time there wasn't even a word. Tang silently grinned. He then flipped his right hand and revealed a pockmarked dagger. This was naturally the one he had before. It didn't fall into the shining spirit tribe's hands like the other toys. Actually, this was normal. His black meteorite, mother of iron dagger, and Sylvia's flame spear were obviously not ordinary goods. Naturally, Andre and the others would carry them around as trophies. Hiss, hiss, hiss. The dagger first agilely drew a circle of afterimages around Tang's palm. This was him exercising his wrist. Then a few fingers lightly pinched the dagger, causing it to tremble slightly and sparkle. Although they were only in the void, Lan Sha and Shini, who were walking over, squinted their eyes. Shock slowly emerged on their faces, because in that fleeting sparkle, there were patterns of flames, flowers, ancient trees, birds, and giant beasts. If one looked carefully, they were clearly vivid tribal totems. Oomph. Coming back to her senses, Shini pursed her lips and threw away the wood in her hand. She muttered in a dissatisfied voice, so skilled. And you say that your sideline is stealing. I think you're clearly carving fake seals. After all, it was a primitive wilderness. There were still many kinds of animals and plants. Not long after, Andre and the others dug up the required plant roots, fruits, and some black liquid and other auxiliary tools. The following matters were much simpler. Since Tang had shown off his skills before, he was naturally in charge of carving the seals. Thus, in this strange northern wilderness, a certain ancient modern craft was deeply imprinted. Then, it slowly spread and became famous soon. The plants and fruits entered the daggers afterimages one by one. In the next moment, the seals of the surrounding tribes were thrown out one after another. Shini, Andre, and the others who were waiting on the side hurriedly received them. Then, with one hand, they picked up the notice of eliminating the rebels and soaked the seals in the black liquid with the other. Ha! I'll cover, but in an instant, the seals of the various tribal chiefs appeared below the notice. They were extremely realistic, almost identical to the original. It had to be said that seeing these seals representing the authority of the various tribes in their own hands, a strange feeling of mischief and accomplishment arose in everyone's hearts. Then, they became even more excited. Be careful not to put all the seals on one notice. It will be exposed. After casually reminding them, Lan Sha picked up a piece of paper covered with many seals. He squinted his eyes and looked at it carefully. He took a deep breath and murmured expressionlessly, "Phew." In the future, the rules regarding the seals of the various tribes must be changed. After all, he was in high position. Lan Sha's perspective was indeed different from ordinary people's. This was when he realized the problem of piracy. Of course, this was a matter for the future. Now, she needed to think about how to reset the plan. Tangen's move had undoubtedly completely destroyed Lan Sha's previous plan. Fortunately, this was a big step in a favorable direction. It was also because of this that Lan Sha's narrowed eyes were shining. It seemed that he was brewing a bigger plan. The sun gradually rose in the east. Her face was red like an apple, like a 16-year-old girl who was full of love. Unfortunately, the girl's aging speed was a little fast. As the altitude gradually increased, her face quickly paled and even looked a little gloomy. It was noon. Young Marshal, the left side of the road has been completely sealed off for 30 miles. Ah, good, well done. Anna stroked his chin in high spirits. The left side is completely sealed off. Shiwei has already informed the tribal areas on the right side to be in position. As for the middle, Anna, who was in the middle of the army, waved his hand decisively. Pass down my order. The troops will speed up. I want to see my cute little sister Lan Sha in half an hour. Ha! Charge! 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 Amidst the continuous urging, thousands of troops stirred up a cloud of dust and rushed forward. Anna, who was in the lead, was even more excited. He kept whipping his horse and almost ran in front of the scouts. Yes, he was excited. Compared to the grief of his grandfather's death in battle, Anna was more interested in seeing Lan Sha's usually calm and composed expression of panic. Oh, just the thought of it made his heart burn with passion, because it represented conquest and revenge. That's right, Anna liked Lan Sha. To be honest, this was also a useless sentence, because in the imperial city, he was not the only one who had feelings for Lan Sha, who was both beautiful and intelligent. And it was no exaggeration to say that the number was shocking. It covered almost all the youths of the right age in the northern wilderness. Of course, Anna's advantage was undoubtedly more obvious. His status was there for all to see. Not only was he born in the War Lion tribe, but he was also the grandson of the highest commander in the northern wilderness. With this status, he was already several steps ahead of most of his pursuers. Moreover, the northern wilderness was different from the brand. Here, women's status was far behind men's. There was no need to elaborate on the reason. In such a harsh climate, men with strong bodies naturally had an easier time getting food. That was why if Lan Sha was just an ordinary girl, Anna would have already snatched her away. Unfortunately, her mother was the Northern Wilderness Empress. With this halo, Lan Sha was not a woman who could be taken by force. But it was also because of this that Lan Sha's charm in the hearts of many youths in the Northern Wilderness had undoubtedly reached a new level. Of course, even with this status, if Lan Sha's talent was mediocre, she would eventually become a sacrifice for the tribe's alliance through marriage. But everyone in the Northern Wilderness knew that Lan Sha was extraordinarily intelligent, almost demonic. If it wasn't for Tiu, she would have directly become the next Northern Wilderness Empress. In fact, this was still the talk of the town. Otherwise, Tiu wouldn't have been so eager to follow and Shuai to the front lines of the brand after coming of age, hoping to use actual military achievements to suppress his crazy sister. Anna also had this idea, and it was not at all inferior to Tiu's. The so-called difference was only that Tiu wanted the throne, while Anna wanted to conquer Lan Sha. Anna still couldn't forget how he had lost to Lan Sha time and time again in tactical deduction in front of his grandfather. Oh, and at that time, there was also Tiu and some other noble descendants of the tribe. Ever since they were young, they had never won, not even once. But his grandfather would always sigh when he saw this. The more normal ones were, what a pity if Lan Sha wasn't a woman, then there would definitely be another Z in the northern wilderness. The more abnormal ones were, comparing them to Lan Sha and sighing in disappointment. The northern wilderness believed in the survival of the fittest. Anglos' actions were not without the intention of provoking Anna and the others, hoping that they would take a step further. But in the eyes of Anna and the others, this was an undeniable humiliation. Humiliation could make people improve. 30 years in the East, 30 years in the West. Who could determine success or failure? Humiliation could also make people completely dispirited and then give up on themselves. Lan Sha was outstanding and had always been outstanding. In contrast, Anna and the others became even more vulgar and uncouth, and were abnormally depressed. What the F*CK was there to praise. She was just a woman who was going to get married and be pressed down by a man in the end. Of course, this kind of angry roar would only appear in the dreams of Anna and the others, or in places where there were no human traces. And even though they felt good after roaring, they still had to nervously observe the surroundings to see if there was anyone around them. Damn it! It was also because of this mentality that when someone found Anna and vaguely suggested betrayal, he didn't hesitate to agree. The condition was that he had to hunt down Lan Sha himself. They hit it off immediately. That was why Anna was feeling very good right now. He was leading his troops to hunt down Lan Sha, and soon he would be able to defeat him for the first time and wipe away his previous humiliation. What? Leading more than 10,000 troops and winning with an unfair advantage? Don't mess around. Who cares, as long as he can win? Anna, who felt that victory was in his hands, was even thinking about what to do after capturing Lan Sha. First of all, he definitely couldn't kill him, not to mention that there was no news of victory from the imperial city. Just the temptation of capturing Lan Sha as a prisoner was enough. Lan Sha, Lan Sha. When the imperial city is secured, watch how I'll press you down and humiliate you. Half an hour quickly passed by in Anna's fantasies, but there was still no sign of Lan Sha in his line of sight. The army stopped advancing, and the scouts continued to report that Lan Sha and the others were not found. Anna's good mood instantly disappeared, and his face turned ashen as he roared, "Damn it! Who the hell can tell me where Lon Shah is right now?" The officers looked at each other, speechless for a moment. The left road was blocked, the right road was also blocked, and the middle road was completely surrounded, but Lon Shah and the others had disappeared. It was like casting a net into a pond where fish could be seen jumping out of the water, only to find that the net was empty. It didn't make any sense at all. Could we have missed them? Should we go back and search again? After a while, one of the officers braced himself and suggested. Anna couldn't help but frown when he heard this, and he was a little hesitant. Although he had lost to Lon Shah in tactical deduction, he was undoubtedly still a military man as the grandson of Anglos. There shouldn't be any loopholes in the army's large-scale advance, and going back would be a waste of time. But if it was Lon Shah, there was a chance that he might have escaped. Just as Anna was hesitating whether to go back and search again, a voice rang out. "It's no use. They have already escaped to the tribal area on the right." What? There was an uproar, and everyone suddenly turned to see Shiwei riding his horse towards them with a bitter smile on his face. "Escaped to the tribal area on the right?" Anna frowned and asked bluntly, "What's going on? Did we not inform them? Or did some tribe have a death wish and let them pass?" "No, sir, the situation is much more serious than that." Shaking his head helplessly, Shiwei pulled his horse closer and said, "We have already informed all the tribes before, and their reactions were similar to what we expected. Most of the chiefs agreed to seal off their territory, but they were a little vague about whether they would help us. About an hour and a half ago, the atmosphere changed. When we patrolled past, some tribes began to find all kinds of excuses to prevent us from entering their territory." Anna was furious when he heard this. "Damn it, how dare they?" Shiwei approached him with a bitter expression. "At first, I couldn't figure it out either. I immediately found a few small tribes and forced our way in and pulled out the chiefs. Fortunately, they were still afraid of the majesty of the army and didn't do anything to us. After a series of threats, we finally got them to tell us the reason." Pause for a while. He licked his dry lips. "They said that many tribes have already stood on the side of His Highness Lon Shah, and they even stamped the seal of their respective chiefs." Ha! Good, good, good. Anna was so angry that he laughed, and coldness burst out from between his teeth. "Since they have a death wish, then they can't blame me. Men, young marshal." Shiwei interrupted the order, and then smiled bitterly. "Wait for me to finish. There are many chiefs who have stamped the seal, covering almost all the surrounding tribes. We can't fight it all. Wait." Anna was stunned when he heard this, as if he had vaguely thought of something. He hammered his head a few times, and then his eyes suddenly widened. He blurted out, "That's impossible. They've been chased by us all this time. How could they have the time to persuade so many tribes?" "Yes, I thought about this problem too. Later, when I talked to the chiefs of those small tribes, I found some problems with some details. Well, young marshal, look at this." As he spoke, Shiwei took out a piece of paper. "This is the suppression, notice written by His Highness Lon Shah, and below it are the seals of the chiefs of the various tribes. One copy is left in each tribe, and the other is in their hands. I took this out by force from a small tribe." He pointed with his finger. "This is the Green Sand tribe, and this is the neighboring Snow Snake tribe. When I talked to the chief of the Green Sand tribe, he said that the Snow Snake tribe had already agreed to join the alliance and stamp the seal. But when I contacted the chief of the Snow Snake tribe, he said that the Green Sand tribe had agreed to join the alliance first." This. Anna blinked blankly and then knocked on his head. Wait. Let me think about it. My mind is a little confused now." "Young marshal, I've already thought about it. It's very simple." Shiwei's expression suddenly became very strange, and he looked like he was crying and laughing at the same time. "His Highness Lon Shah is very knowledgeable, and he definitely knows the totems of the surrounding tribes. So, engraving a fake seal naturally wouldn't be a problem. F***CK. Chapter 6:21. More than 10,000 elite soldiers rushed over without stopping to rest. The left flank outflanked, the right flank coordinated, and the middle pushed forward. Such a large force. But in the end, they were defeated by a factor that left one speechless. The power of a fake chapter was so terrifying. With such a huge psychological gap, perhaps only Anna's trembling F***CKME could be heard. Could explain it a little. After a while, he came back to his senses and issued orders one after another. The left flank was called back, and the middle was a step ahead, immediately turning to the right side to attack the tribes. Anna's expression was unsightly, very unsightly. This was not just because of the ridiculous reason just now, but also because of another reason. Lansha had already expected this reason. Although Anna and the others were still strong, they were still rootless duckweeds. No one could be sure how the situation in the imperial city would turn out. It was hard to say whether they would win or lose. Therefore, when they came, other than capturing the important Lansha, Anna also came with the order to end the battle quickly. To be honest, Anna was very confident before. Originally, no matter how strong Lansha was, what could he do with just 20 bodyguards? But now this plan was undoubtedly shattered. Anna took a deep breath and completely recovered, turning to ask with a sharp gaze. Can you still confirm Lansha's position now? More or less. Shiwei nodded and pointed forward. We had already patrolled more than half of the area, so that they could only escape in this direction. I've checked, and there are the most tribes in this direction. Do you think they will keep running forward? That's hard to say. After thinking for a while, Shiwei shook his head and calmly analyzed. Although they have the support of many tribes, it is not easy to gather such scattered forces in one place. His Highness Lan Sha can only mobilize those 20 bodyguards, and that is a shortcoming. So they should choose to escape in the chaos instead of gathering forces to fight back. In other words, we still have a chance. No. Anna suddenly interrupted, his eyes flashing. I know her. She is very proud. As long as there was enough opportunity, she would not choose to run away pathetically. Instead, she would stay and take advantage of the situation plan. Moreover, I have to admit that she also has the ability to counterattack in a short period of time. So, Your Highness Lansha, Anna said resolutely, she will choose to stay here. However, what she needs right now is an entry point that can stir up the situation. Where's the entry point? Suddenly, Anna's eyes widened and he slammed his fist down. Where's the largest tribe in the area? Shiwei was taken aback, but quickly reacted. It's the barbarian bear tribe in the northwest. Quick! Order the troops to change direction and head there. As mentioned before, although Lansha was much worse than Lansha in terms of tactical deduction, it didn't mean that his military talent was bad. In fact, it was only because Lansha was too outstanding. What's more, after being abused for so many years, it was only natural that he would have some insights. Hence, it wasn't an exaggeration when Anna said that he understood Lansha in the afternoon, a few miles away from the barbarian bear tribe, for figures were approaching. The barbarian bear tribe is the largest tribe in the surrounding 100 miles. Conservatively speaking, they have a combat power of 6,000. It is said that this tribe leader has a marriage alliance with the war lion tribe, and they are quite close. After a pause, Shini closed the book and looked a little worried. Commander, do we have to go there? Yes. If it was before, I would have led everyone to escape without hesitation. But now, pointing at Tang Yin, who had an innocent look on his face, Lansha shrugged. The situation has changed. Everyone has scattered to different tribes, which means that we have a hidden force in our hands. Of course, this force is still wavering. Therefore, as long as we can successfully persuade the barbarian bear tribe, which is the largest power in the surrounding 50 kilometers, to take the lead, the counterattack will be successful. Patting Shini, who was still worried, Lansha continued, Don't worry, I can handle it. When we get there, you guys just have to follow my signal. If you need a show of strength, Mr. Arthur, you have no problem with that, right? I haven't seen the actual situation, so it's hard to say. Tang In touched his nose and shrugged. If the barbarian bear tribe leader's strength hasn't reached Earth rank, and there are no obstacles within 10 steps of him, I have the confidence to kill him in one hit. You just need to scare him a little, then there's no problem. Snap. Snapping his fingers, Lan Sha turned around. As for you guys, Shini, Andre. Yes, if it succeeds, you guys need to stay in the barbarian bear tribe for a while. You guys can be considered as hostages. Don't be too nervous. Just eat and drink for a few days and you'll be out. Shini couldn't help but cover her mouth and chuckle. Andre shrugged and made a commander, I'll listen to you expression. Obviously, they had a lot of confidence in Lan Sha. Okay, that's it for now. Wait, I have a question. Pondering over Lan Sha's entire plan, Tang In frowned slightly. Even if you can successfully mobilize the surrounding strength for your own use, how can you guarantee that the group of people chasing behind us will watch us slowly accumulate strength and not retreat, only to be killed in the end? He smacked his lips. TSK, isn't this a little wishful thinking? Sorry, I'm just this straightforward. It's fine. Lan Sha shrugged and looked at Shini and Andre. He leaned closer to Tang In and explained in a low voice. There are some things that can't be said directly. Let's put it this way. I understand Anna. He has always been eager to defeat me, but he has never been able to do so. And this is undoubtedly a good opportunity. So as long as there's a chance, he won't give up. Paused for a while, narrowed his eyes like a fox. And after we've dealt with the barbarian bear tribe, I'll personally be the bait and lure him to chase after us. Haha, Mr. Arthur, your strength and escape skills are both excellent, so I'll have to rely on you to protect me. Tang In was stunned when he heard this. He pointed at Lan Sha and then at himself. Just the two of us? That's right. Lower your voice. Don't let Shini and Andre hear you. They won't agree with me doing this. Cautiously looking at the suspicious Shini and Andre, Lan Sha straightened his body and patted Tang In's shoulder. He blinked and said loudly, in short, everything depends on you. Tang In was speechless when he heard this. You really think highly of me? Of course. Mr. Arthur, perform well. This is related to the antidote and my impression of you in the future. Tang In rubbed his forehead and put on a fake smile. Haha, thank you. You're welcome. As they spoke, the four of them approached the outskirts of the barbarian bear tribe and appeared within the range of the tribe's security tower. But even so, there was no movement. This was normal, as there were only four of them. The barbarian bear tribe was the largest force in the area and had many passers-by. Naturally, they wouldn't pay much attention to them. When they were about 100 meters away from the main entrance of the tribe, perhaps they saw Tang In's obvious appearance as a brand. The barbarian bear tribe finally reacted. A small group of barbarians directly ran over. Lan Sha was the first to stop at this moment. She raised her head slightly and slowly emitted the unique aura of a person in a high position. She was the second princess of the Northern Wilderness royal family. Unless the tribe leader of the barbarian bear tribe personally welcomed her, she wouldn't casually step into the tribe. The small group of barbarians who didn't know what was going on approached and raised their weapons to ask something. Suddenly, they heard a loud roar. How dare you? Before the voice died away, Andre violently attacked and instantly attacked the leader. Then, she coldly glanced at the surrounding barbarian soldiers, who were intimidated by her power and couldn't help but take a few steps back. Withdrawing her gaze, Andre took a deep breath and shouted to the sky. Where is the tribe leader of the barbarian bear tribe? Prince Lan Sha has come in person. Quickly come out and greet him. Although Andre wasn't as powerful as Tang In, she could still be considered an expert. Her long roar was like thunder rolling in the clouds. It instantly spread far away and echoed endlessly. Thud, thud, thud. The surrounding barbarian soldiers, who had just reacted and were about to attack in anger, couldn't help but change their expressions and take a few steps back. Looking at Lan Sha, who covered half of his face, they hesitated for a moment. They subconsciously wanted to greet him, but they were afraid of making a mistake and making a fool of themselves. At the same time, the patrolling soldiers on top of the tribe's earthen wall were also in an uproar. They hurriedly put down the bows and arrows they had just raised. Lan Sha always acted in a low-key manner. Occasionally, she would go out and hide her identity, just like now. However, because of the praise of Ongros and other important people, her reputation in the northern wilderness tribes was widespread. She could be considered a legendary person. Now, this legendary person had actually come to the tribe. How could the barbarian bear tribe not be shocked? Soon, the main gate of the tribe was opened. A group of more than 10 barbarians, who obviously had an extraordinary status, rode their horses and rushed in. Seeing this, Tang In raised his eyebrows and said to Lan Sha with a smile, "Hee, it seems like your subjects don't really respect you, Prince." "Umph." Lan Sha snorted lightly. He didn't say anything, but his gaze gradually turned cold. The truth was in front of him. This group of people was undoubtedly the tribe leader and the upper-class members of the tribe. There was nothing wrong with their attitude of hurrying over to greet Yongling, but it was hard to understand why they rode on horses. It must be known that Lan Sha wasn't sitting on a horse. Therefore, according to their status, the tribe leader of the barbarian bear tribe should have come on foot. Otherwise, it would be disrespectful to look down on Prince Lan Sha when they got close to him. Moreover, even if they used the excuse of hurrying over to greet Yongling, they were only 100 meters away from the tribe's gate. It wouldn't take them long to get down from their horses at the gate. There is no doubt that they did this on purpose. The next scene also proved this point. This group of cavalrymen didn't slow down when they were a dozen steps away from Lan Sha. It was only when they were about 10 steps away from him that they hurriedly pulled on the reins and let their horses neigh. The horses' hooves kicked up a cloud of dust that fell in front of Lan Sha. It was an astonishing provocation. Childish. Stupid. When Tang In heard the cold whisper next to him, he couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth. But soon he understood. The tribe leader of the barbarian bear tribe in front of him was vaguely provocative. He thought that it was just a show of strength. However, in the eyes of Lan Sha, who was almost demonic in intelligence, it undoubtedly confirmed two things. First, the barbarian bear tribe already knew that Anna was hunting her down. This was normal. Even though the barbarian bear tribe wasn't located in the periphery of the tribal area, and Anna and the others might not have been notified, as the largest force in the surrounding area, they naturally had their own channels of information. Second, the barbarian bear tribe hadn't sided with Anna until now. The tribe's higher-ups were probably still in a state of hesitation. This guess was actually very easy to come up with. If the barbarian bear tribe had already decided to side with Anna, why would they make such a childish provocation? Wouldn't it be better to just kill them directly or pretend to be kind and deceive them into being imprisoned in the tribe? When he thought of this, Tang In raised his head to look at the majestic, middle-aged barbarian bear tribe leader, who was secretly pleased with himself. He couldn't help but shake his head and think to himself, if this fellow knew that his provocation had unknowingly revealed so much information to Lan Sha, he would definitely fall off his horse. Unfortunately, the barbarian bear tribe leader didn't know, so he was still laughing heartily. As he slowly got down from his horse, he grabbed the reins and casually greeted, "Niece Lan Sha, long time no see. Why did you suddenly come to my barbarian bear tribe?" Step. Andre's face turned ashen when he heard this. He instantly took a step forward like an enraged cheetah, ready to pounce at any moment. Shini's little face was also flushed red. Her eyes were filled with anger, and she looked like she was about to bite someone. There were countless tribes of all sizes in the northern wilderness. It was normal for them to scheme against each other in the open and in the dark. Of course, if there were disputes, there would be cooperation. Marriage was one of the most common, and it was also the most cost-effective method of cooperation. No matter if it was the Heavenly Wolf imperial family at the top of the pyramid, the Battle Lion tribe, or a small tribe with only a few dozen people, it was the same. The Barbarian Bear tribe had a marriage alliance with the Battle Lion tribe, and the Battle Lion tribe had a marriage alliance with the Heavenly Wolf imperial family. In this way, it was reasonable for the Barbarian Bear tribe leader to address Lan Sha as his niece. However, this form of address was undoubtedly disrespectful. When Andre roared earlier, He had already made it clear that Lan Sha had come with the identity of an imperial highness. Moreover, even if this didn't happen, unless Lan Sha took the initiative to lower her identity, the barbarian bear tribe leader shouldn't directly address her as his niece. Waving his hand, Lan Sha's expression was calm, as if he didn't notice anything. The corners of his mouth drew a shallow arc as he narrowed his eyes and smiled. Uncle Orson, it has indeed been a long time. Lan Sha came this time only to play. Oh, and also to see how Uncle Orson is going to rebel. Rebel? Swish, swish, bang. As soon as Lan Sha's voice fell, it instantly caused a commotion among the dozen or so people opposite him. The barbarian bear patriarch slipped in shock and fell to the side of the horse's body. Fortunately, he was quite agile. When he fell to the ground, he used his arm to support himself and quickly flipped over, escaping the embarrassing situation of a dog eating mud. Oh! Tangan held his forehead when he saw this. He couldn't bear to look at it. This fellow still fell in the end. Lan Sha, niece. Your Highness. Even though Orson was the patriarch of a large tribe and had seen countless big scenes, he was still stunned by the rebellion label that was suddenly thrown at him. He stammered, "You really know how to joke, huh? Are you joking?" Lan Sha raised her eyebrows and asked indifferently. This non-committal attitude made Orson's dry laughter become weaker and weaker, and the scene became even more silent and awkward. Then Orson, who slowly came back to his senses, gradually stiffened. In any case, he was still the leader of a tribe. Even when facing the noble Highness Lan Sha, he was scared in such a sorry state with just a few words. Naturally, he felt a little embarrassed. At this moment, Lan Sha suddenly took a few steps forward and said with a relaxed smile, "Haha, of course, this is just a joke. Don't tell me Uncle Orson doesn't think so." No, it's... Haha, of course it's a joke, huh? Lan Sha's change in attitude was too sudden, and Orson, who had just figured it out, stuttered again. "That's good." Lan Sha looked around and said casually, This doesn't seem to be the place to talk. Pa." Slapping his forehead, Orson waved his hand and made an inviting gesture. "Look at me. Highness Lan Sha, let's talk inside the tribe. Please, please." Tang In rubbed his nose when he saw this, and he glanced at the barbarian bear patriarch, whose attitude had changed from arrogance to deference in a short period of time. He was completely led by the nose without realizing it, and he couldn't help but sigh in admiration. Regardless of the final outcome, at least Lan Sha had indeed made a good start. The barbarian bear tribe was indeed the largest force in the surrounding 100 miles. The entire tribe occupied an extremely large area. Although they didn't build a city, their defensive power couldn't be underestimated. Because of Andre's loud howl, countless barbarians gathered around the road to watch them as they entered the barbarian bear tribe. Some of them were in the open, while others were in the dark. Lan Sha was undoubtedly the most eye-catching, but Lan Sha seemed to be used to it and didn't mind it. He looked around, smiled and nodded, and said something to Orson from time to time. At the same time, there were also quite a lot of eye-catching gazes on Tang In, second only to Lan Sha. However, these gazes weren't so friendly, and the reason was obviously because of Tang Un's identity as a brand. Fortunately, no one dared to call for everyone to attack together at this time. Moreover, although Tang Un's identity as a brand was eye-catching, he wasn't the only one in the northern wilderness. One had to know that there were many brand strategists beside the important people of the northern wilderness tribes. Most of them were captives, and a few of them took the initiative to join them. They were actually doing quite well. After all, in the hearts of the people of the northern wilderness, the brand were naturally cunning, and had many tricks up their sleeves. After walking for about 10 minutes, under Orson's lead, everyone filed into the tribal chief's meeting room. Well, it was just a slightly spacious stone room. Other than a few rare animal skins, there weren't any special decorations. Perhaps it was because Orson had regained his courage after arriving in his own territory, and he wanted to regain the face that he had just lost. Orson's expression once again became careless as he casually waved his hand to greet them. Then he sat down on the main seat made of tiger skin. Seeing this, Lanshaw's expression didn't change, as if he didn't care. He casually sat on the wooden chair below and tapped the armrest lightly. Sinead pulled a chair over and sat beside him, her face tense. As for Tang and himself, he stood behind Lanshaw with Andre. He glanced around at the 10 or so higher-ups of the barbarian bear tribe who faintly surrounded them, as well as the guards who were looking at them provocatively from the corner of the room. He smacked his lips slightly and didn't take it seriously. There's a banquet at Hongmin, but you don't even have a cup of tea. I really despise you. Chapter 622. Tap, tap, tap. In the spacious stone house, the atmosphere was eerily quiet. Only the sound of Lanshaw's slender fingers tapping on the armrest could be heard. It was as if the stalactites in the grotto were falling to the ground below in a rhythmic pattern. At first, no one paid attention to this sound, but after a few minutes, when no one spoke in the house, this sound began to invade everyone's ears and spread to their minds. Orson tightened his grip on the tiger pelt and frowned slightly, his expression gradually becoming impatient. This sound was really annoying. It was only a few minutes of tapping on the armrest, but Orson's state of mind was naturally abnormal. However, there was actually a hidden inevitability, just as Tang, In, and Lanshaw had expected. Although Orson had not received Anna's notice, he was indeed aware of the rebellion that had occurred in his territory. To be honest, Orson was currently very conflicted and had not made up his mind. That's right, the relationship between the barbarian bear tribe and the battle lion tribe could be considered close. In the past, he had used this relationship to obtain many benefits. Otherwise, the barbarian bear tribe would not have developed to this extent. Therefore, in terms of emotions, Orson was on the side of the battle lion tribe. If the person Anna was chasing was not Lanshaw, he would have already led his troops to help. However, the person being chased was Lanshaw, His Highness Lanshaw of the Heavenly Wolf Imperial family. This was an out-and-out rebellion. As such, Orson had no choice but to hesitate. He was the leader of the tribe and shouldered the interests of the entire tribe. He could not let his emotions affect his decisions. If this matter did not succeed, he would not be the only unlucky one. It was very likely that the barbarian bear tribe would also vanish in an instant. Of course, if this matter succeeded and he extended his hand to help at this time, there would naturally be many benefits in the future. However, if he did not make a move now, he would naturally be hated by the battle lion tribe and would definitely face a tragedy in the future. To rise to the top or fall into the abyss. It was all in a single thought. How could this not make Orson feel great pressure? It could be said that if he had a choice, Orson hoped that Lanshaw would not appear in front of him. If he did not see him, his heart would not be troubled. However, Lanshaw just had to appear here, tap, tap, tap. The more Orson thought about it, the more irritated he became. The more irritated he was, the more he felt that the hammering sound was urging him to die, making him very unhappy. Patting the tiger's skin and suppressing the stifling feeling in his heart, Orson decided to speak first and cleared his throat. Cough, cough. Just as he was about to open his mouth to speak, Lanshaw suddenly raised his head and smiled. Uncle Orson, are you here to ask me why I'm here? Great. As a bystander, Tang and naturally saw things more clearly. At this time, he couldn't help but secretly give Lanshaw a thumbs up. Some things were related to the mysterious chi field. Just like negotiations, it was very subtle, but at the same time, it was indescribably wonderful. This was Orson's home ground, and he undoubtedly had the psychological advantage. It was also because of his attitude that the scene fell silent. It could be said that the one who spoke first would be the weaker one, and Lanshaw exerted pressure on the hesitant Orson by hammering his fingers inconspicuously, successfully luring him to speak first. Then, right when Orson had just broken the silence, Lanshaw suddenly spoke up and took the initiative to speak. This woman was really plucking the feathers from the geese, not leaving the slightest bit of opportunity for others, sure enough. Orson was stunned and nodded subconsciously. He had indeed wanted to pretend to be completely ignorant. After all, no matter how the situation developed, it was always right to pretend to be ignorant. Ha! The barbarian bear tribe has a combat strength of close to 10,000, and the elite earth-violent bear tribe can fight against 10. Uncle Orson, why do you have to act so cowardly? After a small compliment, Lon Shah crossed his fingers in front of him and asked calmly, "So, Uncle Orson, what's your attitude towards this matter?" Attitude? Haha. What right do I have to express my attitude? Orson scratched his head and decisively started to act ignorant again. Lon Shah raised his eyebrows and said casually, "Oh, as a member of the Northern Wilderness Tribes, we should be loyal to Her Majesty. Uncle Orson should know this, right?" Or paused for a while and frowned. Does Uncle Orson really have the intention to rebel? What nonsense? Then why didn't the barbarian bear tribe send out their troops? Because Lon Shah suddenly sped up his questions, causing Orson to be tongue-tied. But then, a rebellious feeling suddenly arose in his heart. He let out a long breath and leaned forward, looking at Lon Shah with a faint smile. "You should know where my woman came from. Which side do you think I will lean towards?" After saying that, Andre suddenly clenched his fists. He sensed that the surrounding atmosphere had suddenly turned cold. At the same time, a few powerful auras instantly enveloped them. After all, the barbarian bear tribe was a large tribe. Although there was still some distance between them and the upper echelons of the Northern Wilderness tribes, it was not surprising that they had a few experts. Tang and could naturally sense these auras. In fact, when he came in, he had already noticed that the guards standing in the four corners of the room and behind Orson were somewhat abnormal. They were obviously expert from the tribe who had disguised themselves to prevent the negotiation from collapsing. Of course, since he could see the depth of their auras, Tang naturally did not care. He was now looking at Sydney, whose body suddenly tensed up like a frightened cat. The corner of his mouth curled up, showing a hint of schadenfreude. "This is not important, and I don't care. The important thing is..." Lon Shah's reaction was unexpectedly cold. It was as if he did not feel the tense atmosphere around him. He raised his head slightly and narrowed his eyes, asking in return, "Are you sure you know where I come from?" Orson's breath suddenly stopped. His woman naturally came from the Battle Lion tribe, which he had a marriage alliance with. Previously, he had taken the opportunity to pressure Anna, not because he really wanted to side with her, but because he wanted to turn the situation around and vent his anger. But now, Lon Shah, who came from the serious royal family, suddenly asked in return. With her status, of course, she had the right to not care where Orson's woman came from. On the contrary, Orson himself had to consider the consequences of siding with Anna. It could be said that not only did he not vent his anger, he was directly suppressed back. "I know what you're thinking." Lon Shah was unforgiving. He looked at Orson and said calmly, "Your woman comes from the Battle Lion tribe. Usually, the two tribes are very close, so in terms of feelings, you will be more inclined to side with the Battle Lion tribe. But," he spread out his hands, "until now, you have not done so. Why?" I'm thinking. Or rather, you're hesitating." Lon Shah looked into Orson's eyes and smiled. "Why are you hesitating? It's very simple. Because in the depths of your heart, you are not optimistic about the Battle Lion tribe's betrayal this time." His tone suddenly changed, and he did not hide his sarcasm. He looked around and said, What a ridiculous betrayal. Ever since my mother became the Northern Wilderness Empress in the tribe, in the past 20 years, no matter if it was the military or business, all kinds of things have been developed, and everything has been renewed. How can a few clowns use some absurd and funny reasons to interfere with such a situation? And you, Uncle Orson?" Lon Shah suddenly turned his head, his eyes sharp as knives, and said word by word, "You are still hesitating?" His words suddenly became hurried. "Do you think that your woman, the relationship between the barbarian bears and the Battle Lion tribe, will become your bargaining chip? That was before. Now, I can tell you very responsibly that Anna and the others will definitely lose. And those relationships that made you feel complacent and obtained many benefits will send you and the barbarian bear tribe into a bottomless abyss." As if unable to bear the pressure brought by Lon Shah's words, Orson subconsciously leaned back and licked his dry lips. His expression changed slightly. "What a talent. Tangan could not help but raise his eyebrows when he saw this, and he once again sighed with emotion. It was just a short sentence, but coming from Lan Shah's mouth, it should have been about the close relationship between the barbarian bear tribe and the battle lion tribe that was above them. But now, it seemed to have become Orson and the barbarian bear tribe's life reigns. Moreover, it sounded reasonable and was not an exaggeration at all. Then, without waiting for Orson to understand why, Lan Shah waved his hand, and Andre behind him reached into his pocket. Suddenly, the sound of weapons clashing could be heard. The surrounding guards all took a step forward, and the atmosphere suddenly became cold. Hey guys, don't be nervous. It's just a stack of paper, not a string of exploding crystals. Looking around with a relaxed expression, Andre slowly stretched out his arm. As expected, it was just a stack of paper. Tangan did not need to glance at it to know that it was his masterpiece, a notice of suppression with many tribes' fake seals. Of course, Tang In did not care, but it did not mean that Orson did not care. Hua. Orson first casually glanced at it, and then his body suddenly shook. He blinked his eyes and waved his hand with force, finally sending the notice flying. At the same time, his expression quickly turned black and then green at a speed visible to the naked eye. Below Orson, other than Lan Shah, there were more than 10 tribes upper echelons. They looked at Orson's expression that changed faster than flipping the paper, and they were baffled as they caught the paper that flew out. How is this possible? How did this happen? Damn it, this group of bastards actually did not inform us. There was an uproar in the stone house. After counting the number of familiar patterns, the upper echelons of the tribes looked at each other in dismay. They were shocked to find that it included almost all the tribes in the surrounding area. In a moment, other than being shocked and puzzled, the upper echelons of the tribes were in a state of anger. They were angry that the small and medium-sized tribes in the surrounding area actually chose a side without informing them, and even stamped it in black and white. If the strength of all these tribes were gathered, it would be more than 10,000, perhaps even 50,000 soldiers. If the people of the barbarian bear tribe had known about such a huge force, they would not have been conflicted. They could have just directly joined them. However, they did not know that in the small and medium-sized tribes, when the chief saw the barbarian bear tribe's totem seal, they were also secretly cursing them for being unkind. After a while, when he saw the densely packed seals, Orson finally reacted and asked in a deep voice, "You need my barbarian bear tribe to take the lead?" Before the troops were sent to conquer Anna, these tribal seals were actually just seals. There was no denying it in black and white, but there was naturally the fear of shooting the bird that stood out. After all, most of these tribes were forced to join under the influence of fake seals. At this time, if a large tribe, such as the barbarian bear tribe, was willing to take the lead, it would naturally be the best outcome. To be precise, your barbarian bear tribe needs to redeem itself. Lan Shah was very smart. Just by hearing Orson's words, he already knew that the other party had more or less decided to stand on his side. The reason why he asked this superfluous question was nothing more than to take advantage of this, to ask for some benefits. When Orson heard this, the corners of his eyes twitched. He only felt that Lan Shah's calm eyes seemed to be able to see through all his thoughts. No matter what plans he had or what he wanted to say, he would always be firmly suppressed in the previous moment, without any chance to turn the situation around. However, Orson was still unwilling to give up. How could the 10,000 elite soldiers of Anna be easy to deal with? If he led the troops to attack, the tribe would definitely suffer a great loss. In addition, after this matter, the barbarian bear tribe could only rely on the heavenly wolf royal family to bear the consequences of completely breaking off relations with the battle lion tribe. No matter how he looked at it, he had suffered a great loss this time. Naturally, he hoped to get some benefits after getting a promise. "Your Highness Lan Shah." After muttering to himself for a moment, Orson hammered the tiger skin armrest and said with narrowed eyes, "The barbarian bear tribe can stand on your side, but we need more promises. This is what we deserve. Moreover, well, don't blame me for being too frank. You are now in my territory." As soon as he finished speaking, Orson, who had been sullen until now, finally displayed the demeanor of a large tribe's chief. Although he did not issue any orders to attack, the surrounding guards all stepped forward and pointed their weapons at Lanshaw's feet. This was also a form of respect. At the same time, a few icy killing intents descended in an instant. The area they covered wasn't Lanshaw and Sheeny. In the current situation, the tribe's experts couldn't be so ruthless. Therefore, their main targets were Tang In and Andre behind them. Andre's body suddenly tensed up and then trembled slightly. Cracks appeared on the rock under his feet and gradually spread. Obviously, the pressure he was under wasn't small. Tang In stood quietly in place with his head lowered. Apart from that, he didn't make any other movements. It looked as if he was scared silly by the condensed killing intent. My promise is that you will follow my instructions and lead the troops to kill the rebels. The barbarian bear tribe won't be destroyed. Lanshaw's tone was very resolute. He didn't care about Orson's threat at all. Then, he tilted his head and looked at Orson. He raised his hand and pinched the earlobe at his hair bun and said with a relaxed smile, "Moreover, I am in your territory." Suddenly, puff, puff, puff. Bursts of blood sprayed out from the four corners of the room. A few ordinary-looking guards seemed to have been hit by something invisible and were instantly plastered to the wall. Their faces were filled with unconcealable shock and fear. It was impossible for them not to be alarmed, because just a moment ago, when they combined their killing intent to suppress the two personal guards behind Lanshaw, an enormous bloody killing intent suddenly counterattacked. In front of this bloody killing intent, their killing intent was like a stream that had just entered the sea. It was incomparably weak and incomparably childish and laughable. But this doesn't mean that I am weak. A figure instantly swept in front of Orson. There were two expert guards blocking him like a door. Their reaction speed was very fast. When their companions around them were crazily spurting out blood, they had already stood in place and met the figure that was madly rushing over. Two pairs of fists whizzed out at almost the same time. Hit! With a low shout, the two pairs of fists successfully hit the figure. However, it was as if they had broken through water ripples. In the next moment, the fists of the two experts collided. Boom! Amidst the sound of bones breaking, the two of them were sent flying. Behind them was the dumbfounded Orson. He clearly didn't react in time, or rather, his reaction wasn't fast enough. Buzz! The saber at his waist was halfway out of its scabbard when it was pressed back by a palm. Then he felt a chill on his neck. A dagger full of holes appeared in his peripheral vision. "Uncle Orson, what do you think?" Lanshaw asked calmly and politely. Then, bang, bang. The two expert guards who had been sent flying finally landed after smashing the solid wooden tables and chairs on the ground. It was just 3 short sentences, but they were directly combined into one sentence. "I'm in your territory, but that doesn't mean that I'm weak. Uncle Orson, what do you think?" In just a few breaths' time, the scene that was left behind was the expert guards who were spurting out blood like fountains from the 4 corners of the stone house. The 2 experts from the tribe who were still groaning and rolling on the ground, and Orson, who had a dagger pressed against his neck, as well as the stunned silence in the stone house. Was there a need to think? At least, Orson felt that there was no need. He subconsciously looked around and realized that one of the guards who was originally standing behind Lanshaw had disappeared. Then, a rather mocking voice rang in his ears. "Good boy, it's too dangerous for children to play with knives. It's better to put them away." In just a short moment, the upper echelons of the tribe and the guards in the stone house were in an uproar. Some were agitated and resentful, constantly scolding that damn guy to be careful. There were also some who scolded him for a despicable sneak attack. There were even some barbarians who were waving their sticks and attacking. However, they were held back by the older and more prudent upper echelons to prevent their reckless actions from harming the life of their patriarch. However, at this moment, Lanshaw unexpectedly waved his hand. Tang In, who was behind the tiger skin seat, understood. Without saying a word, he directly put away his dagger and left. Orson subconsciously touched his chin. Indeed, there was no longer any coldness. escaping death. Orson was momentarily stunned. Lan Sha patiently waited for Orson to come back to his senses. Then he calmly said, "Uncle Orson, between Anna and me, who do you think will win?" Of course, of course. Looking at Tang, who had returned to his original position and was grinning at him, Orson's body couldn't help but tremble. "Of course it will be you, respected Prince Lan Sha. Then what is your choice?" "I will immediately dispatch troops. And I will immediately send my woman back to the Battle Lion's tribe." Chapter 6:23. At the main gate of the Barbarian Bear tribe. Completely different from the tense atmosphere when they came in, Orson and the other higher-ups of the tribe gather at the gate, whispering from time to time with bitter expressions. Outside the gate, the 4 people who came in weekly, 2 men and 2 women, stood on both sides of the gate, seemingly saying goodbye. "Leader, we succeeded. Anna and the others are dead for sure, huh? Keep a low profile, keep a low profile." Lan Sha waved his hand to stop Shini, who was laughing with her head raised. The current Lan Sha did not have the serious expression he had during the negotiation. He glanced at Orson and the others not far away and smiled mischievously. "It's fine to be a little happy. It's not good to provoke them." That's true." Lan Sha was of course only joking, but Shini immediately covered her mouth and looked around carefully. She lowered her voice and said, "Since the Barbarian Bear tribe has already agreed to send troops, then why don't we stay here together, leader?" "Because it's not over yet." Lan Sha shrugged and said casually, "Until now, we have only roughly completed the preliminary preparations. Although the Barbarian Bear tribe has agreed to send troops immediately, they only have 7,000 troops at most, which is not enough to fight against Anna's rebel army. Only by joining forces with other small and medium-sized tribes will this matter be truly safe. And to reach this step, it will still take some time." Pausing for a moment, Lan Sha caressed Sinead's worried face to comfort her. "Don't worry. Although there will be some danger, there are more than 20 elite bodyguard with us, and that guy." Lan Sha pointed at Twain, who was not far away. The latter seemed to have sensed something and raised his head to look at them in confusion. He waved his hand in greeting. "Haha, you saw what happened just now. I was also a little surprised. Orson and the rest could not stop this brand at all. So, you don't have to worry about my safety at all." Shini pursed her lips. "That's true. Then let Andre go with me." Huh. I knew you wouldn't let him go." Just as Sinead was stunned, Lan Sha immediately narrowed his eyes craftily like a fox. "If I had known about your thoughts earlier, would I have let Andre accompany you in the Barbarian Bear tribe? TSK. I just didn't expect you to be so heartless. You have someone in your heart, but you don't have me." How could I?" Tang In, who was not far away, greeted him inexplicably. He touched his nose and squinted at Lan Sha, who was not far away. There was undisguised admiration on his face. There were many ways to negotiate, but the most suitable method for the previous situation was coercion and bribery. And the brilliance of Lan Sha's method was that he did not hesitate when it was time to exert pressure. For example, when he led Orson by the nose in a domineering manner before entering the tribe, or when he sent a secret signal to make Tang In suddenly attack, shocking everyone. At the same time, when Lan Sha needed to be gentle, he did not hesitate to lure out Orson's advantage. The inextricable relationship between the Barbarian Bear tribe and the Battle Lion tribe. Then, he elaborated on this as Orson's fatal weakness. In this way, he used between me and Anna, who will win, to end the negotiation smoothly in one fell swoop. Orson was actually under Lan Sha's control throughout the entire process, including his grievances, anger, shame, and other emotions. It could be said that this was a textbook negotiation. It could be said to be perfect. Of course, the more outstanding Lan Sha was, the more troublesome it would be for Tang In. He rubbed his forehead, thinking that with such an opponent, his future seemed to be dark. Arthur. Raising his eyebrows, Tang In turned around and saw Andre walking over with a hesitant expression. "What's the matter?" "Yes, I have something to ask of Mr. Arthur." Before he finished speaking, a scream suddenly came from not far away. Tang Yin and Andre subconsciously turned their heads and saw Sinead looking over. Then, she instantly rushed into Lan Sha's arms like an ostrich. Retracting his gaze, Andre hesitated for a moment, then suddenly bowed slightly and said sincerely, "Mr. Arthur, please protect our leader for the next period of time. Please. This chick still needs others to protect her." Hearing this, Tang In slightly grinned and spread out his hands. "You don't need to ask me. Even if it's for my own life, I won't let anything happen to your leader." This was the truth. Andre nodded when he heard this, and his expression immediately became much more relaxed. Just now in the tribe's meeting hall, most people remembered the scene of Tang In instantly capturing Orson. But Andre was different. He was more concerned about the scene of the experts in the corner of the stone house being suppressed by Tang In's killing intent to the point of vomiting blood. At that time, he was standing beside Tang In and felt the same way. The shock in his heart couldn't be described with words. And what made him even more dumbfounded was that Lan Sha and Sinead, who were one step away, didn't have the slightest reaction to this crazy killing intent that was like a sea of blood. What did this mean? It meant that this brand's control of killing intent had already reached the pinnacle. Just imagining it was enough to make Andre's hands and feet turn cold and his heart tremble. At this time, what are you guys talking about? Lan Sha pulled Sinead, whose head was almost lowered to her chest, and asked with a smile, "Oh, nothing. Captain, please be careful." Andre took over and said solemnly, "Don't worry." After casually replying, Lan Sha turned around and waved at Orson, who was inside the door. The latter was startled, but when he came back to his senses, he naturally rushed over. "Your Highness, do you have any other orders?" It can't be considered orders." Lan Sha shook his head slightly and said with a smile, "If I'm not wrong, it won't be long before Anna leads his troops here." At that time, Uncle Orson's expression changed slightly when he heard this, and he hurriedly waved his hand. "Your Highness, don't worry. My barbarian bear tribe has officially broken off relations with the battle lion tribe. Lan Sha helplessly touched his forehead and laughed. "Don't be nervous. I believe in Uncle Orson's promise. He's just helping me pass on a message." Pause for a while. He pointed at the mountain ahead. At that time, Uncle Orson can tell Anna that I'll be waiting for him there. Okay, no problem." After carefully looking at Lan Sha's expression and confirming that he wasn't testing him, Orson immediately patted his chest and nodded, repeatedly assuring him. After this matter was settled, Tang In and Lan Sha didn't delay any longer. They rode on the two horses provided by Orson and galloped towards the mountain range in the distance. At the same time, the barbarian bear tribe behind them also sealed their 4 gates and entered a state of battle readiness. As for Sheeny and Andre, they both stayed in the barbarian bear tribe, half to supervise and half to be hostages. On the galloping horse, Tang In looked behind him, turned around, and said with a smile, "You're that confident in their safety?" Glancing at him, Lan Sha's delicate body rose and fell with the horse, and she calmly said, "As long as I'm alive, they won't die." Tang In was slightly startled when he heard this, and then he couldn't help but nod. That was the truth. If Orson kept his promise, it would naturally be best. And if Orson rebelled at the last moment, he absolutely couldn't hand Sheeny and Andre over to Anna, because this was his last resort. So as long as Lan Sha's side didn't have any problems, the safety of the two was indeed guaranteed. Sighing in admiration and nodding, Tang In raised his thumb and smacked his lips, saying, "Although it's a little suspicious of flattery, well, I have to say that your guts are really big." Tang In's words were sincere. Previously, when Lan Sha explained to Sheeny, he said that there would be a caravan of more than 20 experts accompanying them to escape. But in reality, those experts had been given other orders by Lan Sha to unite the surrounding tribes, so they wouldn't stay around Lan Sha at all. "Thank you." Lan Sha pulled down the lapel of her clothes that covered half of her jade face and accepted the praise calmly. There's a saying in the northern wilderness: if you want to hunt an eagle, you must first release the rabbit. So if we can successfully keep these 10,000 rebel soldiers, I don't mind taking some risks. Hee hee. You're worried that these 10,000 rebel soldiers will go elsewhere, right? Like the Imperial City? Raising an eyebrow, Lan Sha turned to look at Tang Un, as if not expecting this brand to have the ability to see through the essence of things. Then, she simply shook her head. They won't succeed, as if she didn't want to talk about it, or maybe she didn't care to talk about it. Lan Sha didn't explain further. After a moment of silence, she suddenly frowned and looked up. Mr. Arthur, I have a question for you, and I hope you can answer truthfully. Tang Un shrugged and smiled non-committally. Haha, I can't guarantee that. It depends on whether your question is to my liking. I want to ask. Lan Sha hesitated, but in the end pursed his lips and asked, that half-wolf jade pendant, was it given to you by Z? Tang Un was taken aback at the question. His mind quickly recalled the conversation between Lan Sha and Shi Wei when the team first escaped, and an indescribable sense of absurdity rose in his heart. There was no doubt that Lan Sha had wanted to ask this question for a long time, but had been looking for a chance to talk alone. Moreover, Lan Sha was clearly asking, which meant that what Shi Wei said before was mostly correct. In other words, Z's old flame really was the Northern Wilderness Empress. Realizing this, Tang Un was a little dumbfounded. Damn, Z, oh Z, you're good. You're cool. You're awesome. As the brand war god, you actually managed to get the Northern Wilderness Empress. I'm impressed, aren't I? So, Lan Sha was smart enough to not get an answer. But looking at Tang Un's extraordinarily complicated expression, he undoubtedly got the answer. His gaze instantly became blank, and he looked up at the gloomy sky, muttering to himself. So it's really like that. The two were lost in their thoughts, and the scene suddenly became quiet. Only the sound of galloping hooves could be heard, spreading all the way to the mountains. After a while, Tang Un was the first to come back to his senses. He glanced at Lan Sha, who was in a rare state of confusion, and his heart skipped a beat. Lan Sha, where's the antidote? The antidote is HM. Lan Sha instantly came back to his senses and suddenly turned his head, his blank gaze suddenly as sharp as a knife. Damn! Seeing this, Tang Un couldn't help but curse, and pulled at his hair with a conflicted expression. Damn it, just a little bit more oomph. He snorted coldly. After this incident, Lan Sha was completely awake, and he probably wouldn't have such an opportunity in the future. Tang Un's eyes turned, and then he rode his horse closer. With a serious expression, he said, Lan Sha, since the matter is already out in the open, then I won't hide it from you. Sai, that's right. Z is actually my father, and this jade pendant that he often wipes has been with him for many years, and it was only officially passed to me not long ago. It's a pity that we split up halfway when we came to the Northern Wilderness. He wanted to say something, but stopped. It was reasonable and left room for imagination. Paused for a while, he looked affectionately at Lan Sha, who was slightly stunned, and said with unusual sincerity, in other words, Lan Sha, we are brother and sister. Novels and dramas were often melodramatic, and were often filled with father and son killing each other, lovers loving and killing each other, or simply being the father, the brother, or the sister, and so on. In short, the more twisted and bizarre the plot, the more interesting it was. But that was only novels and dramas. However, somewhere in the Northern Wilderness, someone was vividly acting out how art came from life. It had to be said that, as the only audience, Lan Sha's expression was quite strange. He was shocked, horrified, and inexplicable. Anyway, he was shocked. After a while, clap, clap, clap. Clapping his hands, Lan Sha nodded and sighed. Is it time to play the emotional card to get the antidote? Mr. Arthur, with your acting skills, I also feel that it is very necessary to recruit you and contribute to our Northern Wilderness drama. Tang Un blinked, and his expression became more painful. Why don't you believe me? Of course, this matter did happen too suddenly, and I also just found out, so I can understand your doubts at this moment. But Lan Sha, we're in the same room right now. We're killing each other. You're acting more and more like it. Okay. Shaking his head speechlessly, Lan Sha raised his finger and pointed at his face, and suddenly asked, "What do you think of my appearance?" Ah. Hearing this irrelevant question, Tang could not help but be stunned. Then he nodded and said, "Not bad. Quite beautiful." This was the truth. There was nothing to nitpick about Lan Sha's face, and his facial features were extremely exquisite. And her figure did not look like a burly northern wilderness person, but no different from the Brand people. So, naturally, it was more in line with Tang An's aesthetic. Lan Sha continued, "My mother, the Northern Wilderness Empress, is also very charming. Yes, more charming than me. As for Z, although I haven't seen him with my own eyes, all the rumors say that his face is perfect and even more beautiful than a woman." Pause for a while, his eyes fixed on Tangen's face. "But you—" He spread his hands and made an apologetic gesture. "That's right. Z's heaven-defying appearance would definitely make most women ashamed to death." "Wait, that's not right." When Tang reacted, he looked at Lan Sha's eyes, then subconsciously silently looked at his common face, and the corners of his mouth and eyes twitched at the same time. F***CK. You can't hurt people like this. It's possible that they have the same father, but different mothers. Or Z, or your mother, or both of them have plastic surgery. Also, you have to allow genetic mutations to exist. Hey, wait for me to finish. Sister, you're killing your own brother now. P.S. Sorry, it's an elder's birthday. The civet cat drank too much. Let's start with 4,000 words. I'll make up the missing words tomorrow. Chapter 624. Dusk 10,000 Hills. The northern wilderness was a desolate and barren land. It was common to see mountains, forests, and other barren lands. Moreover, it was the coldest season in the northern wilderness. The cold wind was blowing, and it sounded like the howling of the abyss. It was really chilling to hear. All of this was a constant reminder that this was not a place suitable for normal humans to live in. However, at this moment, there were tens of thousands of figures leaving the human gathering place and entering this desolate land in this cold season. "Young Marshal, we found some tracks and 2 horses. We can confirm that Orson did not lie to us. Her Highness Lan Sha has indeed entered this place. But," Shi Wei frowned and hesitated for a moment before continuing, "but it seems that Her Highness Lan Sha only has 1 bodyguard with her." "Only 1 bodyguard?" "Yes, it's that Andre from the Savage Sect. This person is the best around her." Shi Wei raised his eyebrows as if he was very familiar with Lan Sha's small group. "Haha, it seems that Our Highness is very confident that she can escape our search." Nodding, Shi Wei seemed to be more convinced by this judgment. He then frowned and said, "Young Marshal, Orson's attitude seems a little off. When we arrived, the Savage Bear tribe was already in a state of alert." Waving his hand to interrupt, Anna narrowed his eyes and said, "Ignore them. Even if the Savage Bear tribe is really betrayed by my clever sister, they will need at least a day or so to form a real fighting force." Pause for a while, then changed the topic. "Ha, you don't think that we can't catch these 2 people in a day, do you?" Shi Wei was silent. That was the truth. No matter how heaven-defying Her Highness Lan Sha's methods were, she was still a girl who did not know any martial arts. Therefore, in this encirclement where the advantage was obvious, the outcome was almost certain. Of course, whether it was the silent Shi Wei or the seemingly confident Anna, they both knew that Lan Sha was not stupid and would not do something so obviously stupid. However, they also knew that they had no way out. They had to catch the other party as soon as possible. Let's talk about this area. Anna was the first to break the silence. He raised his head and looked at the barren land nearby. "I want to see what kind of battlefield Sister Lan Sha has chosen. There is no special terrain here. It's just that the area is over 100 kilometers of no man's land. Moreover, there are ravines, dense forests, and so on. It's rather complicated. Well, from this point of view, it's quite suitable for hiding." "Oh, then what are we waiting for?" Anna shrugged. "Since His Highness has already made a move, we naturally can't refuse. Let's go, I can't wait." The hunt for his life had begun. Mountains, deep valleys, deep valley. Shiwei's scouting was accurate, and the terrain here was extremely complicated. With Bran, perhaps only the 100,000 mountains could compare to it. Tang Tian's Lin Tian Thousand, Liang Mountain. Even with the burden of Lan Sha, if Tang In wanted to shake off the pursuers behind him, he could easily do so by increasing his speed. However, they didn't enter the mountains just to escape. They also had a mission to lure the pursuers, so they couldn't be reckless. Sometimes, they even had to stop for a period of time. Dusk was approaching, but a bonfire was already lit. There was no special preparation, and the smoke rose into the sky. Whoosh! The bushes parted, and Tang In walked out with a fat hare in one hand and some berries in the other. At the same time, Lan Sha, who was staring at the flames, suddenly turned his head and raised his arm. Several brightly colored berries were very eye-catching. Don't be impulsive. Oh! Tang In looked at the berries that could kill people several times in an instant and waved his hand. The hair in his hand didn't seem to have died, and it woke up when Tang In cried out in surprise. It frantically kicked its legs. With a wave of his hand, more than a dozen real berries were accurately thrown to Lan Sha's side. Following that, Tang In flicked his index finger, and with a thud, the struggling hare fainted again. Tang In walked over and looked at Lan Sha, who was hugging his knees and sitting next to the bonfire. He chuckled, "Huh, are you a little scared in the wilderness?" Lan Sha glanced at him, as if he couldn't be bothered to answer such a boring question. He carefully picked up the berries and looked at them carefully under the light of the fire. Tang In couldn't help but curl his lips. "Don't worry, it's not poisonous. I'm not like a certain someone." Tang In's wilderness survival skills were needless to say. As long as he didn't deliberately do bad things, even if he didn't recognize some of the fruits in the northern wilderness, he wouldn't do such a rookie thing as picking poisonous things. As for Lan Sha, Tang In was a little surprised. Originally, he thought that although Lan Sha was a ruthless character with a high level of intelligence, she should be lacking in wilderness survival knowledge after all. To be honest, Tang In was prepared to bring along a burden on the road from the beginning. But the facts proved that Lan Sha was indeed Lan Sha. Even when faced with things that were completely inconsistent with her status, such as checking the toxicity of the berries and so on, she still did it very professionally. After examining them, Lan Sha grabbed 2 green fruits and casually threw them out. These are tough fruits. They taste very bitter and are not suitable for eating. Tang In smacked his lips and thought to himself, "All right, looks like I'll have to go to the space later and use my blood energy to exchange for some information on the creatures in the northern wilderness." The berries didn't matter, but handling the hare could only be left to Tang In. Tang In didn't have much to say about this. Although the two sides were still in a hostile relationship, Tang In still had this kind of demeanor. Besides, if he didn't handle it, he wouldn't be able to eat it himself after skinning and bleeding. The hare was cleanly sent to heaven while it fainted. He skewered it with a wooden stick, set it over the bonfire, and sprinkled some seasoning powder that he had just conveniently collected. Taking advantage of this short time, Lan Sha used a branch to gesture a few times in front of Tang In and said calmly, "The pursuers should have already entered the mountains. Our bonfire has been burning for about a quarter of an hour, which means that they will catch up in another quarter of an hour at most. This is our current position. When the time comes, we will have a few escape routes." Lan Sha had no problem with the overall situation. What's more, the pursuers were still behind them, so they couldn't play any tricks for the time being. Thus, under the guidance of Lan Sha, in an orderly manner, explained the following itinerary. But after listening for a while, Tang In shook his head. "This won't do. If it's just to escape, I can take you to shake off the pursuers now. But since you want to lure the enemy, running in front of the enemy like this will affect their enthusiasm." According to Lan Sha's plan, it was a replica of their previous escape in the small mountain range. This was also what Lan Sha was good at. In terms of the overall situation, he was able to anticipate the enemy's every move and move around the periphery of the encirclement, neither close nor far, but not entering. There was no problem with this plan. Coupled with Tang Un's abnormal speed, it was unlikely that the pursuers would catch up with them. But the pursuers weren't fools. After a few times, they would naturally be able to see the clues. At that time, it would be really hard to say whether they would continue to chase after them or not. Of course, such a result wouldn't be a loss to Tang Yin. But Lan Shan now made it clear that he wanted to keep these tens of thousands of traders here. Then, there was a problem. After all, Tang Yin was carrying the strange poison on his body. No matter who it was, he wouldn't feel at ease. Tang Yin naturally hoped to solve the problem here as soon as possible. The sooner he found out about the antidote, the better. Lan Sha frowned slightly. Then what do you plan to do? We can try to take the initiative to enter the enemy's encirclement. Of course, we'll retreat safely in the end. Tang Yin spread his hands. Just like the northern wilderness proverb you mentioned before, since the rabbit has been released, why not put it next to the eagle's nest? The chances of catching the goshawk will be higher this way. No, Lan Sha knew the flaw in this plan, but no matter what, it was better to be safe. So, he shook his head and rejected it. This is playing with fire. There are too many uncontrollable factors. If we're not careful, we'll fall into the abyss. And the rabbit is just a bait. I don't want to be eaten by the goshawk. Don't worry, we're partners now. You should try to trust your partner. After all, although my life isn't as precious as yours, I only have one life. I don't agree. TSK, you little girl, I'm thinking for you. How can you refuse to listen to me? TSK, don't think I don't know that you're only doing this for yourself. In the midst of the quarrel, the rabbit meat quickly emitted a fragrant aroma. The two of them did not pay much attention to it. They tore it into pieces and continued to argue at the same time. In fact, this kind of argument was inevitable. It could be considered a disagreement in philosophy. Tang Yin was good at precise control over a small area, while Lan Sha was good at strategic planning and predicting the enemy's moves. If there were enough people or an excellent team, the two of them would be the most suitable partners as long as their relationship was good enough. However, although the two of them were temporarily cooperating, they were in a state of hostility. There was no trust at all. In this way, when facing the same thing together, there was no doubt that there would be differences in choice. After a round of argument, no one could convince the other. Instead, they attracted some wolves. I can tell you very responsibly that your plan has no future. Hey, you surrounded me before. What happened in the end? In the end, you were caught. Bah, if I wasn't in a bad state at the time, you would have the chance to catch me. The exasperated words suddenly stopped. Tang Yin's ears twitched. He frowned and looked to the left. Lan Sha's observation was very sharp, although she did not have Tang Yin's abnormal senses. Looking at the other party's expression and calculating the time, she knew that the pursuers were coming. She quickly got up and pointed to the back. Let's go break out from here. Don't get excited. Tang Yin was calm. He continued to bite the rabbit meat slowly. They haven't arrived yet. Even if they did, it could only be a few scouts. Don't worry, it won't be too late to leave after eating. You? Lan Sha's pretty face suddenly sank. She was born to be in control of the overall situation. Every step she took was precise. It didn't matter if he was stupid or slow, but she couldn't tolerate subordinates with casual personalities. However, Tang Yin was used to being free and undisciplined, or it could be said that he had an occupational disease of being alone. He also had a natural resistance to orders. Both of them were very confident in the things in their own fields. They indeed had the right to be confident and even proud. This was their first cooperation. They were like two hedgehogs, unable to get close to each other. Just as Lan Sha was thinking that it seemed to be a mistake to bring this guy to escape, Tang Yin suddenly raised his eyebrows. Oh, you're quite fast. As soon as he finished speaking, he threw away the rabbit meat in his hand. His figure burst out and flashed to the west like a ghost. Almost at the same time, several figures poked their heads out from behind the ancient trees to the west. It could be seen that they had just arrived. Unexpectedly, the Grim Reaper had arrived in an instant. Suddenly, there was a commotion. As the figures intersected, a few blurred bloodlines flashed and disappeared. The commotion stopped abruptly. The figure at the back reacted the fastest. Seeing the situation, he hurriedly jumped out. However, just as the figure was in the air, a black shadow flashed in an instant. Then, he could only watch as a dagger drew a freehand arc and went straight between his eyebrows. Puff! Bang! He kicked the scout's corpse into the bushes and clapped his hands. In a short moment, a certain someone used his own method to restore the scene to silence. Tang In half bowed, the corners of his mouth raised. He waved his hand and made an inviting gesture. "Your Highness, please." Lan Shan narrowed her eyes and walked over expressionlessly. Undisciplined and undisciplined. Chapter 6:25. The twilight gradually deepened, and the dark moon hung low. At this time, the sparks continued to light up, wander, and intertwine. If one looked down from above, they would find that these sparks were flanking forward, like an ancient behemoth with a bloody mouth, silently swallowing something. There was no doubt that these sparks were the torches in the hands of the tens of thousands of pursuers. The first contact, not long ago, had been reported back to the Central Army. Anna was naturally overjoyed when he couldn't find anything. Then he cast a big net for this specific area. On the right, at the forefront of the sparks, in a small, dense forest. After advancing here, the sparks paused for a moment, probably hesitating whether to include this place in the encirclement. In the end, some sparks went in, and the sound of footsteps was heard. "They're here," murmuring in a low voice, behind an ancient tree that was about 3 people's arms. 2 figures sneakily poked their heads out. Seeing the sparks not far away getting closer and closer, they instantly shrank back. "Just do as I said just now. Later, I will rush to the left to distract them. You take the opportunity to run out of the forest from the right, and then hide behind the boulder 500 meters away. At most 5 minutes, I will shake off the pursuers and go there to find you." Gesturing, Tang In whispered. Nodding, Lan Sha simply said, "Okay. If you don't arrive in 5 minutes, I will move to the foot of the mountain in front." "Okay. What is Oku?" After several bargaining arguments, Tang In and Lan Sha reached a consensus that nothing ventured, nothing gained. Of course, Lan Sha also put forward a limit, which was that the number of times they put themselves in danger should not be too many. Once or twice in half a day was enough. This was the best strategy to lure the enemy deep, and Lan Sha had no choice but to concede. Lan Sha was not afraid of risks. Otherwise, she would not have taken the initiative to go into the mountain with Tang In to lure the enemy. But this kind of risk must be within her control. Not being surrounded by the pursuers was her bottom line. But Tang In had the ability to accurately control a small range, so he was not afraid of being surrounded by the bushes. In such a situation, his abilities could be put to the best use. In the end, since it was Lan Sha who chose Tang In as his companion, he naturally had to consider Tang In's opinion. Thus, he came up with this compromise. By the time Tang In explained that okay, no problem, the sparks were already more than 10 steps away. If they walked any further, they would find them hiding behind the tree. Phew! He took a deep breath and exhaled softly. Tang In patted the ancient tree. Amidst the rustling of the leaves, his figure leaped out like lightning. He paused for a moment. "What's that?" "It's them." "Quick, chase after them, chase after them. Call for help." Cries of surprise rang out one after another, followed by heavy footsteps. Twain glanced over and saw nearly 100 barbarians rushing towards him with a look of ecstasy on their faces as they swayed their torches. He curled his lips and thought, "Haha, you trash want to keep up with my speed." This was not arrogance. If Tang In was not trying to buy time for Lan Sha to escape, with his speed, the barbarians might not be able to find him even if he flew over their heads. However, just as Tang In was about to underestimate them, suddenly bang! Ouch! A sound of impact came from behind him, mixed with a short cry of pain. Tang In stopped and turned around in shock. He saw Lan Sha's blurry figure 100 meters away. He was lying on the ground, rubbing his forehead with one hand and covering his mouth with the other. In front of him, a small malnourished tree with thick arms kept swaying, and leaves slid down. There was no doubt that he had bumped into it. F***CK. Tangan opened his mouth, but he stood still, completely speechless. At the same time, a thought flashed through his mind. That's right, this girl's eyesight doesn't seem too good, but such a tree was in front of him, and he still bumped into it? How short-sighted must he be? Not only Tang Yin, but the hundreds of barbarians who were chasing after him were also dumbfounded by this ridiculous scene. They looked at Lan Sha, who had bumped into him. He struggled to get up, shook his head, staggered a few steps, and fell to the ground again. They blinked their eyes and were a little dumbfounded. The night wind blew slightly, and the scene was strangely silent. "You are my F***king's sister." Tang was the first to come back to his senses. He could not help but look up to the sky and sigh. Then, he quickly turned around and ran back. At the same time, "Your Highness, Your Highness." Your Highness quickly surround him. Hundreds of barbarians also came back to their senses. They were very excited when they saw the situation. They stepped forward and surrounded His Highness Lan Sha, who had been looking for him for a long time. Fortunately, Tangan's speed was really amazing. He burst out at full speed and arrived at Lan Sha's side before the barbarians nearby. Lan Sha's usual calm and wise appearance was nowhere to be seen. His forehead was blue and red, and his eyes were dull. It was obvious that he had not woken up from the strong impact just now. It was a pity that he did not forget to cover his mouth tightly and did not make any sound. Tang did not have the time to laugh or be polite. He stretched out his hand and grabbed Lan Sha's collar and firmly clamped him under his left arm. Then, he turned his right hand, and a blood-red dagger lit up. He violently attacked the barbarians in front of him. Hiss! Although he was carrying a person, Twain's speed did not decrease at all. The barbarians only saw a blur in front of their eyes before Twain instantly closed in on them. Specks of blood flashed and disappeared in a flash. Amidst the miserable cries, flowers of blood bloomed. "Damn it! Stop him!" Tang Yin, who had broken out of the encirclement in an instant, swung his dagger and directly cut the culprit, the small tree, in half. Then he twisted his waist and turned around, lifting his right leg and violently kicking the small tree behind him. Whoosh! Bang, bang, bang. The tree trunk was not thick, but the strength of Tang Yin's sidekick was more than 500 kilograms. Dozens of barbarians behind him were instantly knocked to the ground. Although there were no casualties, the barbarians behind them did not have the opportunity to chase after them. Tang Yin, on the other hand, did not even look at the result of the kick. Clutching Lan Sha, he quickly leaped forward. The previous strategy of creating a diversion was no longer effective. Leaving this place as quickly as possible was the most important thing now. Fortunately, this was only the first experiment, and their current position was at the periphery of the encirclement. Otherwise, if this had happened in the hinterland, no matter how powerful Tang Yin was, it would not have been easy for him to escape. After running for a few kilometers, Tang Yin slowed down. He lowered his head and saw Lan Sha's clear eyes looking at him with a frown. He grinned. "Big sister, you should have told me earlier that you were short-sighted. I was almost played to death by you." Lan Sha turned his head away when he heard this. He probably knew that he was in the wrong this time, and he looked a little guilty. He paused for a moment and said, "Short-sighted? Well, I was born with poor eyesight. Also, put me down." "Forget it." Tang Yin shook his head when he heard this. "I am afraid of you. Luckily, you hit a small tree this time. If it was a huge rock, I would have to carry a wounded person everywhere. It is not worth it. That tree is too thin," Lan Sha explained weakly. He twisted his body, and his expression was a little unnatural and vaguely humiliated. He said again, "Put me down." Tang, and then realized that their posture was a little ambiguous. Although he had picked up Lan Sha by the waist, in that situation, naturally, it was not very accurate. Only now did he feel that the side of his thumb was a little soft. He moved, and an elastic feeling went straight to the bottom of his heart. Oh, what a nice body. In all honesty, Tang Yin's action was purely subconscious, or it could be said that it was the residual effect of the evil body state. but the delicate body under his left arm froze in an instant. Then, Tang Yin saw Lan Sha pursing his lips. His expression was calm, but the coldness in his eyes suddenly appeared. He quietly took out a few bright berries from his waist. Cha! With a curse, Tang Yin hurriedly pushed Lan Sha away. Of course, he used gentle force. Lan Sha steadied herself a few steps away. He squinted his eyes, and there were some dangerous signals in his eyes. Immediately, he raised his hands and Tang Yin said with an innocent face, "Don't be impulsive. You should know that I didn't mean it." It must have been unintentional before, but it was more difficult to say for the few slight movements just now. Naturally, this could not be hidden from Lan Sha, so she was still quietly staring at Tang Yin. Her right hand that was holding the few scary berries tightened and loosened in silence. His throat moved. Tang Yin saw this, and suddenly felt that his mouth was a little dry. He awkwardly changed the topic. "Well, since you're short-sighted, why don't you wear glasses?" After a while, Lan Sha finally put away the berries and asked with a frown, "Eyes? What are those?" It was unknown whether she was genuinely confused or just wanted to end this awkward scene. However, Tang Yin naturally took over the topic and said while gesturing, "It's two concave and convex lenses. Oh, there will be time later. We can replace it with ice cubes. Of course, it melts easily, but it can still magnify the things in front of you in a short time." Seeing that Lan Sha was still frowning, Tang Yin explained again, "Have you noticed that the things under the water droplet will become slightly bigger? You haven't? Well, this is indeed too common and easy to ignore. Tomorrow morning, we can collect some morning dew to try. Think about it. A drop of water can magnify things. Then what about ice cubes? Or concave and convex lenses made of transparent crystal? In short, aren't you His Highness? When we go back, we can order people to make it and use more materials. Even if we can't make glasses, magnifying glasses are still not a problem." In order to eliminate the awkwardness, Tang Yin had to show off some things of the modern world that he only knew a little about to change the topic. However, the effect was very good. Lan Sha seemed to be very attentive to this and asked questions about the details of the production process from time to time. Of course, after all, the two were still in a state of being chased. Now, they were only slightly distancing themselves. When they turned around, they could even see sparks running towards them quickly. Therefore, after a while, the two put aside the issue of glasses and fled forward again. Although the first plan completely failed, it was because of special reasons. Therefore, after distancing themselves for a while, Lan Sha did not refuse Tang Yin's careful proposal. He chose the terrain again and operated the plan of luring the enemy. Just as mentioned earlier, Tang Yin's precise control over a small area and Lan Sha's ability to see the big picture and strategize were the most suitable partners. As long as the two sides could be a little more tolerant and trust each other, the power they could exert would undoubtedly be terrifying. Now, perhaps because of the relationship just now, Tang Yin and Lan Sha seemed to have found some tacit understanding. When they cooperated again, there was a sense of trust. In this way, the tens of thousands of pursuers behind them were undoubtedly in a tragedy. It was not that they could not find Tang Yin and Lan Sha. In fact, Tang Yin and Lan Sha took the initiative to appear in front of them from time to time. Sometimes, they were not far away from the encirclement and disappeared in a flash. Sometimes, they were even right under their noses, but in the end, Tang Yin and Lan Sha always easily broke out of the encirclement. Every time, they were just a little bit away, just a little bit. This distance could even be measured with the eyes. However, the tens of thousands of pursuers who were agitated and anxious couldn't catch up with the two of them. They could only watch them slip away from them, either smoothly or with difficulty. This happened again and again. Although it made the pursuers so depressed that they were about to vomit blood, it also gave them a lot of confidence. They always felt that they would definitely be able to catch the other party next time, or the time after that. Unfortunately, these pursuers did not know that bullfighting was a sport. Otherwise, they would find out how similar the situation was to their current situation. Time and time again, They were so anxious that they were about to go crazy. Time and time again, they mustered up their remaining strength and charged forward. But in the end, they always brushed past their targets. Of course, when they were finally exhausted, they couldn't avoid the fatal sore between their eyebrows. Chapter 626. Early in the morning, the grass was barely visible. The wasteland, which had been noisy all night, finally quieted down a little at this moment. This did not mean that the people inside had left, but at a glance, without those messy sparks, it seemed much quieter. Coo, coo, coo. The early birds also quietly poked their heads out of the forest, looked around, and tried to sound out a few times. Probably because they did not notice any danger in the surroundings. In just a moment, cheerful bird sounds rose and fell one after another. As the saying goes, the early bird gets the worm. Seeing that a new day had arrived, these early birds straightened their feathers and flapped their wings to fly out to look for food. Unfortunately, these diligent mountain birds did not know that there was a saying, the early bird gets eaten. At this moment, suddenly whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. In the corner, 3 oval stones with a sharp sound pierced through the air and disappeared in a flash. It should be said that the sensitivity of all bees to danger was not low. It was almost instinctive. But now, on the highest branch, 3 larger mountain birds were directly hit by the stones as if they did not notice. The birds' heads were badly mutilated, and they fell straight down. Whoosh! The other mountain birds reacted quickly. In the blink of an eye, they flapped their wings and flew away, crying out in alarm, and disappeared in an instant. TSK, TSK, standing so high up. Don't you know that the bird that sticks out gets shot? Keep a low profile, brother bird. In the midst of the banter, a young man walked out from the corner, stretched out his hand, and yawned loudly. He walked over to pick up the breakfast that would be left behind later. Needless to say, this was naturally Tang. After a whole night of hide-and-seek chasing and running at full speed before dawn, they had already arrived at the depths of the wasteland. As for the specific location, Tang did not know, nor did he care, but seeing that Lan Sha consciously adjusted the direction, he should know. As mentioned before, as long as the two of them worked together, or as long as Lan Sha was willing to cooperate with Tang, then the two of them did not have to worry about being surrounded and caught. Although he was somewhat unwilling to admit it, Tang would sometimes think about his journey to the other world and the experience of being chased from time to time. He also felt that his escape experience was probably unparalleled in the world, carrying the 3 unlucky mountain birds. Tang walked out of the sparse forest. When he looked up, he saw Lan Sha's figure beside a frozen stream. His back was slightly arched, and his head was lowered. He was sitting there quietly, as if he was concentrating on something. Seeing this, Tang eyes flickered slightly. He pursed his lips and whistled silently. The word temperament was often mentioned by people. It seemed to be invisible and intangible, but it really existed. Only some of them were covered with a layer of skin, which could be broken with a single poke. There were also some that came from within and were naturally manifested. Thanks to the internet, Tang had seen many beautiful women in the modern world. Her temperament could be noble and cold, or dignified and elegant, and so on. At that time, Tang was an out-and-out loser. When he was dazzled, he might say things like, "That's all there is to it," and so on. But in his heart, he did not think of the other person as a goddess, especially when he was dreaming about her at night. But now that he thought about it, when he compared her with this Lan Sha in front of him, who did not show any kind of attitude, well, Tang had to admit that there was no point in comparing the two of them. Some things were just not there, just like wearing a pair of glasses. It might make a person look more refined, but after talking to each other for a while, one would realize that it was just an illusion. Without seeing the majestic rivers and mountains, without being in a high position, without being able to control the world, without being able to make thousands of warriors rush to their deaths with a single glance, where would the naturally dignified, noble, and elegant temperament of those in power come from? Perhaps conquering such a woman would give him a sense of accomplishment. Bang, bang, bang. Knocking on his forehead, Tang frowned slightly. His expression was somewhat conflicted. Thinking too much, thinking too much. Evil body. Oh, evil body, you are evil. Not een, big brother. Tang didn't dare to guarantee with his moral integrity that this was definitely not his usual way of thinking. Well, at least not completely. Tang Yin now understood what the old butler meant by a subtle change in personality. After becoming a ghost, he was more bloodthirsty, and after becoming an evil body, his perspective of looking at things had indeed changed. This change could not be considered good. It would not cause his sense of justice to suddenly explode. It cannot be considered bad either. He would not think about destroying the world. Instead, it seemed to be closer to doing whatever he wanted. It seemed that it was necessary to find some time to have a good talk with the old butler. After pondering for a while, Tang shook his head to clear his mind of random thoughts and walked over. As the angle changed, Tang could clearly see that Lan Sha was staring at a drop of dew on his finger in a daze. He could not help but raise his eyebrows. What could a drop of water see? Molecules, bacteria. Don't mess around. This is an eye, not a microscope. If one did not start from these small points and looked at the big picture, one would find that the things under the drop of water would become bigger. The degree of change might be very slight, but it was indeed so. Obviously, Tang Yin's words last night had a big impact on Lan Sha. Or rather, Lan Sha's resentment towards his short-sightedness was very deep. Walking a few steps forward, just as Tang Yin was about to wave his hand and tease him, Lan Sha suddenly flicked his slender fingers and water splashed out. Then he reached into his waist and seemed to take something out. He swung his hand and threw it into the frozen stream not far away. Tang Yin's eyesight was so good that he instantly saw that it was a dark red berry. Damn, isn't this the exploding fruit? Just as he thought about it, suddenly, boom, ice cubes splashed everywhere, and mist rose. The thick layer of ice above the stream instantly exploded, and a hole about 3 feet wide appeared. The sound of flowing water below also became clear in an instant. Tang Yin couldn't help but grin. Damn, it was impossible to guard against. If someone accidentally ate it, wouldn't their brain explode and they would be lying flat on the ground? Lan Sha got up after the explosion, walked a few steps forward, bent down, and picked up a few ice cubes. He squinted his eyes and once again entered the state of research. You can't do this. Tang Yin walked to the hole and neatly dealt with a few mountain birds without looking back. You have to find some bumpy ice cubes or polish them yourself. Only then can the effect be magnified. Well, if there are 2 convex lenses, even a telescope can be made. A telescope can see far away. Lan Sha tilted his head and analyzed the literal meaning. Of course, Tang Yin lit a bonfire and placed the 3 mountain birds on a perch. Then he clapped his hands. Since he had nothing else to do, he pointed to a mountain in the distance and bragged. Take that mountain peak, for example. If you rely on your eyes alone, you naturally won't be able to see what's on it. But if you use a telescope, I guarantee that you can even clearly distinguish what kind of trees are planted there. Lan Sha squinted his eyes and looked at the mountain in a daze. He seemed to be shocked by the effect of Tang Yin's words. After a while, he turned his head and frowned. This is also Brand's alchemy item? Tang Yin turned the oily mountain bird and didn't think much about it. He patted his chest and laughed. How is that possible? This is my genius idea. I don't tell ordinary people. Really? Is it real or fake? Tang Yin raised his head to look at Lan Sha's solemn expression, and his heart skipped a beat. He realized that he had said something wrong and tried to cover it up. Tang Yin's reaction was not slow, but Lan Sha was not a normal person. She raised her thin eyebrows and looked at Tang Yin meaningfully. That gaze seemed to have just met him. Tang Yin's expression did not change, but he secretly complained in his heart, because he had already figured out where the problem was. Lan Sha was not a pampered aristocrat. Looking at how easily she had commanded more than 10,000 barbarians to fight, and then thinking about her amazing performance during the negotiation not long ago, he knew that she was not only ambitious, but also full of ambition. Such a strange woman. After knowing the function of the telescope, how could she not know the important role of this item on the battlefield? Tanga was also careless just now. He was preparing breakfast and thinking about the influence of the evil body. He accidentally told her everything about the telescope. Sure enough, after narrowing her eyes, Lan Sha took a deep breath and decisively waved her hand. Mr. Arthur, as long as you can make the telescope, the antidote is not a problem. Moreover, I think I will now decide to recruit you. I just said it casually. Also, don't fool me. You promised me the antidote before. Those are two different things. Okay, then what do you need? Status, fame, wealth, women, or other things? When we reach the Imperial City, I can give you all these. When we go back to Bran. Oh, you think I will let you go back and make a telescope to use on my northern wilderness tribes? Then I'm sorry, I'm not interested in these. Well, then I'm sorry to tell you that the antidote is gone. TSK, don't go too far. To be blunt, your life is now in my hands. Mr. Arthur, you overestimate yourself and underestimate me. I admit that I can't beat you, but at least I have the ability to end my own life. Of course, then your antidote will be gone. Oh, you dare to threaten me? Little girl, you can try. Then come at me. Come at me. Come at me. For a moment, Tang In and Lan Sha were a few steps away from each other, staring at each other. The smell of barbecued meat wafted through the air, and the scene suddenly became a bit of a stalemate. The degree of need determined the value. If it was 2 years ago, Tang would never have thought that he would be a third-rate student who copied and sent 200 applications without any news. There would be a day when he was valued so much that he would not hesitate to restrict his freedom. Damn it! After a while, the quarrel was fruitless. Of course, both sides did not touch each other's bottom line. Even if their voices were getting louder and louder, and their spittle was about to hit each other's faces, they did not choose to make things difficult. The thing that Lan Sha wanted was in Tang Un's mind. It could be said that unless Tang In was willing, no one could take it away. On the other hand, Tang In's life was in Lan Sha's hands. He naturally thought of capturing and interrogating him. But Tang In knew that since this woman dared to untie the chains, and even ran away with him, she was naturally fully prepared in this regard. Just like what Lan Sha said just now, she at least had the ability to end his life, letting out a long breath. Tang In narrowed his long and narrow eyes, and simply sat back beside the bonfire. Let's eat first. At this time, at the tribe's gathering place. If one wanted to count the number of tribes around here, perhaps even the dominant barbarian bear tribe could not do it. It was not that they could not count, but the key was that there were not many good tribes, so most of the tribes migrated all year round. After a long time, naturally no one was willing to do such a laborious and thankless job. At this moment, a large number of people from each tribe walked out. However, this time it was not a collective migration, but a glorious banner of revenge. That's right, Lan Sha's hidden hand was playing a role. In the early morning, after the barbarian bear tribe sent out nearly 5,000 people, the tribe's gathering place was like a calm lake that suddenly had a boulder thrown into it, suddenly setting off waves. Then, as if by agreement, the large and small tribes continued to send out more or less troops, and all of them were personally led by their respective patriarchs. If a void-level cultivator passed by here and looked down from above, they would find this quite a spectacular scene. The men and horses of the various tribes were like small streams gushing out from all over the place. Once they met, they would quickly merge and finally merge into the largest troop. They converged into a river and roared as they pushed forward, as if they wanted to directly rush into the river and sea. Of course, there were no void-level cultivators passing by here, but there were more than a dozen uninvited guests rushing over. Just from the speed at which they were running, it was clear that none of these people were ordinary. Soon, after climbing to the top of a hill, the dozen people saw the spectacular scene in front of them and could not help but stop. Damn it, the prince was right. That little brat Anna can't deal with Lan Sha. The leader was a white-haired old man with an ugly expression. Even though he looked old, his bulging muscles looked like they were cast from iron, causing people to be intimidated by him. Ole, why do you say that? A middle-aged barbarian walked out and looked at the dense crowd of people in the distance and asked in confusion. The white-haired old man called Old Lay had a gloomy expression as he pointed down the mountain. Idiot! That little brat Anna brought more than 10,000 people here to deal with His Highness Lan Shah. Why would he need reinforcements? Pause for a while. Look, there are at least 30,000 people here. Anna must have screwed up, giving Lan Shah the opportunity to mobilize so many people. Old Lay's analysis was very reasonable, and the middle-aged barbarian immediately nodded and asked, "Then what do we do now? With just our people, it's impossible to resist so many soldiers." Not necessarily. After a moment of silence, Old Lay's eyes flashed. At least we came at a good time. These tribes have clearly just been mobilized. We still have a chance. Then what are we waiting for? Let's hurry up and catch up. Oh, right. Old Lay, since we're already here, when we meet His Highness Lan Shah, how should we deal with him? It's best if we capture him alive. The person who asked the question was somewhat hesitant, but Old Lay seemed to have a plan and said unhurriedly, "The situation in the imperial city is not optimistic. We have underestimated Her Majesty. So if we can capture Lan Shah, we can take the initiative. It's a pity that Tu went to the front lines and was captured by the brand. Otherwise, our chances would be even greater." Shaking his head, Old Lay revealed a look of regret, but it disappeared in an instant. His old eyes flashed with a ruthless look. Of course, His Highness Lan Shah's schemes are unparalleled, and he has Andre and more than 20 personal guards by his side. His strength is in no way inferior to ours. So, everyone must not be careless. If the situation does not allow it, we can still send Lan Shah's corpse to the imperial city. Hiss! The moment these words were said, the whistling cold wind was immediately mixed with the sound of cold gasps. Even though these people had extraordinary strength, they could not help but feel their cheeks twitch when they heard this, and they fell silent for a moment. Right at this moment, a clear voice suddenly resounded. "There's someone on the left." The one who spoke was a man wearing a black robe, and half of his face was covered. He was standing at the back, in the corner, and was very inconspicuous. It was as if he had intentionally separated himself from the 10 or so experts of the northern wilderness. Hearing this, everyone immediately came back to their senses and turned their heads. Indeed, not far from the left side of the hill, they saw about 300 people rushing over. They probably did not discover them, but just happened to pass by. Brand B, people sneaky. Although it was the black-robed man who reminded him, the middle-aged barbarian clearly did not appreciate this kindness. He curled his lips, and his expression was full of disdain. If Old Lay had not turned around to glare at him, he would probably have said some insulting words. Hearing this, the black-robed man's robe fluttered slightly, and the brim of his hat slowly lifted. A cold silver light flashed, and then it was lowered. It was a very slight movement, but the middle-aged barbarian only felt a cold, murderous intention in an instant. It was as if he had fallen into an ice house. Thump, thump, thump. He subconsciously took a few steps back and almost fell off the mountain peak. Having made such a big fool of himself, the middle-aged barbarian's face suddenly turned green and red. He suddenly took a step forward, and a lion-like black gas violently rushed out of his body. "You're courting death. Enough." Old Lay shouted angrily and stood between the two barbarians. His face was ashen. "Don't forget that we're here to do business. If we delay the prince's important matter, everyone will die." The black gas gradually dispersed. The middle-aged barbarian was obviously unwilling, but after hearing this, he did not dare to be too presumptuous. In the end, he could only glare at the black-robed man with a murderous intention. On the other hand, the black-robed man was very calm. He stood there quietly and did not even lift the brim of his hat. He completely ignored the barbarian's actions. It had to be said that this attitude undoubtedly made the middle-aged barbarian more angry, and his fists were tightly clenched. He believed that if Old Lay did not stand in the middle, he would have already rushed over. The other experts stood on the side, and most of them had a look of ridicule on their faces. It seemed that they were accustomed to this scene and were clearly enjoying the show. However, Their attitude showed that they were on the middle-aged barbarian side, and that they were eager to teach the black-robed man a lesson. All right, Old Lay frowned after he had temporarily suppressed the situation. It seemed that this matter was giving him a headache. Finally, he simply pointed at the small group of barbarians on the left side of the hill. Kill them quickly. Leave one alive for questioning. His voice had barely faded. Roar! The sullen middle-aged barbarian roared, and the black gas around him was released again. He was the first one to rush down. It was obvious that he wanted to vent his anger on these people. The other experts, including the black-robed man, also rushed down one after another. There was a big gap between an expert and an ordinary soldier. As long as there was not an absolute suppression in terms of numbers, there was no suspense in the slaughter. After a moment, a loud, blood-curdling screech resounded. Chapter 6:27. He had rushed over to vent his anger, but he ended up kicking a steel plate instead. In just a short moment, 2 experts from a northern wilderness were killed by the black-robed man. They were still running in the wilderness. The commotion was fleeting, so it naturally didn't attract anyone's attention. Just as the middle-aged barbarian had said, there were no outsiders here, so no one would know what had happened. It was a pity that even though he had a good plan, he ended up being the victim of his own cleverness. Silently, he and his companions had lost their lives for nothing. Looking away, Tang was still sprinting ahead. His speed and agility were indeed not something an ordinary expert could compare to. The complicated terrain was not enough to stop him from moving forward. Even if Elder Lay reacted in time, it didn't have any effect. He could only fall behind, helplessly chasing further and further away. Among them, the black-robed man was the fastest, and it was obvious that he was holding back, just like how he had hidden his strength before. But even so, the black-robed man looked at the blurry figure in front of him that didn't slow down at all. He couldn't help but shake his head and sigh at his inferiority. This speed was a bit abnormal. Seeing this, Elder Lay and the others had a feeling in their hearts. No wonder Anna and the others couldn't catch Lan Sha. With this speed, if the other party didn't deliberately go easy on them, ordinary soldiers wouldn't even be able to catch up to him. About half an hour had passed, and everyone had noticed a mountain peak right in front of them. It couldn't be helped. This mountain peak was too eye-catching. Not only was it tall, but it also covered a large area. Looking up, the peak of the mountain almost reached the clouds like a natural barrier. We're here. Tangen's long and narrow eyes narrowed as he scanned the surroundings. He couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Where are the reinforcements you mentioned? Haven't they arrived yet? This was the cliff that Lan Sha had mentioned before. She was also observing the surroundings, especially the south. Looking up at the sky, she said, "It's about time. Let's go to the foot of the mountain first." Even if the main force hasn't arrived yet, there should be scouts from various tribes choosing an ambush spot there. Okay, Tangen took a deep breath. Suddenly, he raised his head and let out a long howl. His voice reverberated for miles. Then, his figure sped up again. Like a wild horse that had broken free of its reins, he headed straight for the mountain peak. This long howl was not for nothing. Firstly, it was to point out a path for the pursuers behind, so that they would not be left behind due to their speed. Secondly, if there was really someone at the foot of the mountain, they would come over to patrol after hearing the commotion. This way, they wouldn't have to waste time looking for him after they arrived at the foot of the mountain. As expected, when Tangen was about to rush to the foot of the mountain, several figures quickly greeted him. They also looked familiar. They were the experts from the original small caravan, Lan Sha's personal guards. However, as they approached, they saw the noble His Highness Lan Sha lying on the back of a brand. Their bodies trembled, and their brains almost crashed. What kind of situation was this? Seeing this, Lan Sha's eyes flickered slightly, and an imperceptible shyness flashed by. Then he put on a dignified face and asked directly, "Where is he?" At the back. Hearing this, Lan Sha could not help but frown. "Give me more details." Taking a deep breath, an expert from the caravan gradually calmed down. He bowed and said, "Captain, The reinforcements are about 5 miles to the south. There are nearly 60,000 people rushing over. Nodding, Lan Sha muttered to himself for a few seconds. Then, he decisively ordered, "Cancel all the previous ambush plans. When the 60,000 people arrive here, 10,000 of them will climb the mountain from the south. They will form a defensive line halfway up the mountain under my command. The other 50,000 will face the southeast and set up the wild goose wing formation. They will take down the 10,000 or so traitors." Yes. After roughly explaining the battle strategy, Lan Sha lowered his head and whispered in Tang An's ear, "Then it's settled. We will climb the mountain from the east." "Huh, no problem." Tilting his head, Tang An's long hair that hung down on his head tickled his ears. Of course, he could see Lan Sha's predicament, but the situation was urgent, so he did not have the mood to tease him. He said to the experts from the caravan, "Run, there are more than 10 experts coming this way." After saying this, he stepped past them like a ghost and rushed to the east of the mountain. Hearing this, they turned around in a daze and looked at the two people's backs as they left. Then, they saw Lan Sha's hand covering his thigh. For a moment, they only felt that it was extremely dazzling. It was like a drop of black ink on a sacred snow lotus. Dirty, blasphemous, and other words kept rolling in their minds. This damn brand. Of course, Tang and did not know what the people behind him were thinking. Otherwise, he would have taken the time to come over and teach them a lesson. Do you think it is easy for me to work like a horse and tire myself to death? It's fine if you don't appreciate my help, but you still think of me as a pervert? Is there still any King law? But the next scene showed that these people did not actually wrongly accuse Tang and previously when they were running on flat ground. Although Tang Un and Lan Sha's bodies came into contact several times, they did not clearly feel that anything was wrong. Now that they started to climb the mountain, everything was different. In order to avoid the jagged rocks and accurately find a foothold, the two people's bodies began to inevitably rise, fall, and touch. Almost every time they jumped, Tang could clearly feel the softness on his back pressing against him. He could not help but think of the towering peaks, so they kept changing shape, flattening, bouncing up, and pressing down again. He had to admit that Tangen's mind was wandering at this moment. He condemned the remnant thoughts of the evil body at the same time. This rhythm would lead a decent person astray. At the same time, he secretly compared the figures of Lan Sha and Sylvia in his mind. Well, although he did not see it with his own eyes, Lan Sha seemed to be a little bigger. Cough, cough, as expected of someone from the northern wilderness. On the other side, Lan Sha naturally sensed this as well. Even with her monstrous intelligence, she was still caught off guard by this foreign domain. The embarrassment she had just suppressed surged up, and her jade-like face instantly flushed red. Moreover, she could not blame anyone for this. Tang was running with her on his back, and this was a normal body collision. Even in some dangerous places, when Tang needed to free his hands, she had to take the initiative to tighten her slender jade legs and wrap them tightly around Tang Un's waist. The strange rocks and ancient trees quickly fell from their line of sight. Neither of them spoke as they ran, and the atmosphere was especially awkward for a moment. At this moment, the dozen or so experts chasing them finally arrived at the foot of the mountain. At this time, the tribe's reinforcements had not yet arrived, and the surroundings were silent. Old Lei and the others did not suspect anything. They looked up at the faintly discernible figures of Tang and Lan Sha, and quickly climbed the mountain to catch up. Their only doubt was that the few people who had seen the middle-aged barbarians' movements first looked around and did not notice their arrival. In the end, they could only shrug their shoulders and assume that the other party was arranging funeral arrangements somewhere and had not yet arrived. Of course, no one thought that the black-robed man could win. After all, Old Lei was the strongest here, and the others were basically on par. Thus, in a 2-on-1 situation, the black-robed man's fate could be imagined. But what they did not know was that a few minutes later, the black-robed man, with a leisurely expression, suddenly came out from behind an ancient tree not far away. It was obvious that he had been here for a long time, even faster than Old Lei. It was just that now was not a good time to meet, so he deliberately slowed down a step. After these experts went up the mountain, the tribe's reinforcements arrived in a grandiose manner. Because they had received the news in advance, everyone quietly came to the south of the mountain. Since this mountain was called the Ultimate Cliff, there was naturally a reason for it. It was called the Ultimate Cliff because in terms of height and area, this mountain far surpassed the surrounding mountains. It could be said that it outshone the others. And it was called the Ultimate Cliff because the north of the mountain was a vertical cliff, like an abyss that had split open the earth. Clouds lingered around it, and no one knew how deep it was or what was below. Now that the tribe's reinforcements had arrived at the south of the mountain, because of the area, they did not disturb Tang and the others who were climbing up from the east. Then, the team dispersed, led by thousands of barbarians holding the banner of the barbarian bear tribe. About 10,000 people began to climb the mountain. Although the composition of these 10,000 people was complicated, they were the elites of various tribes. It was mainly because the few guards had heard that more than 10 experts were chasing after them and were worried about Lan Shah's safety. Then, the remaining 50,000 people followed Lan Shah's instructions and came to the southeast of the mountain. They spread out their long wings and sent out scouts, quietly waiting for the 10,000 or so rebels to crash into them. However, the first battle did not come from the foot of the mountain, but from the middle of the mountain. Ting In and Lan Shah did not go straight to the top of the mountain. Halfway there, they saw people moving at the foot of the mountain and decisively moved parallel to it, rushing to the south of the mountain. At this time, the 10,000 soldiers had not reached the middle of the mountain, but it was enough. Tang In reluctantly put down Lan Shah and felt the greasy skin on his palm disappear. He could not help but smack his lips, feeling quite regretful. Humph! Lan Shah could guess what Tang In was thinking. She could not help but snort coldly. Then, after touching the ground, she took a step forward and pulled up her fox fur clothes to cover her crimson jade face. Tang In naturally did not care about such a small threat. Because of the angle, he was looking at Lan Shah's delicate red earlobe. He could feel her embarrassment and could not help but raise the corner of his mouth, silently revealing a hateful smile. Haha! Although this girl is so powerful that it makes people feel hateful, she is still quite cute. This awkward atmosphere was maintained until several experts of the caravan arrived. Among them were the few people just now. As soon as they arrived, they clenched their fists and stared at Tang In. Their gazes were very unfriendly. Ahem! After a few coughs, Lan Shah drew their attention. Her tone was as calm as ever. Spread out the troops and surround the east side of the mountain. Be sure to annihilate them all. Yes. A caravan expert immediately rushed down the mountain and passed on the order. Looking down at the soldiers in the southeast, Lan Shah waved her hand and said, "Pass down the order. Make the two flanks bigger and try to swallow the other side as soon as possible. In addition, prepare 3,000 reserve troops on the periphery and provide support at any time." Yes, Tang In was like an outsider at this time. He stood quietly on the side and watched Lan Shah give out a series of orders in an orderly manner. He could not help but touch his nose and feel a little emotional. According to what Lan Shah said before, this was the second time she really led an army. But now, Tang In did not see any nervousness in her at all. On the contrary, Lan Shah was like a veteran general who had been on the battlefield many times. She was calm and composed when giving orders. It had to be said that sometimes the heavens and the gods were quite unfair. Things like talent really could not be envied. Shaking his head, Tang Un's heart suddenly moved. He thought that if Lan Shah was the child of Z and the Northern Wilderness Empress, then there was nothing to say. After all, her genes were really good. At this moment, suddenly, whoosh! Shouts of killing began to come from the east side of the mountain. The war had finally begun. Chapter 628. Elder Lei and the others knew about the existence of reinforcements from the tribes. Not long ago, they had slaughtered hundreds of people, but they did not know that this was where the enemy had launched their attack. After chasing for a while, they were wondering how Tang Un and his companion had suddenly disappeared. However, they suddenly discovered that there were many soldiers rushing to kill them from far and near. Only then did they realize that the situation was not good. However, it was too late for them to retreat. Their path down a mountain had been cut off, and they were completely surrounded. What was worse was that because they had been scattered, they could not gather together to break out of the encirclement. They could only fight on their own, and their chances of survival were slim. Of course, these people were all experts. Therefore, even if they were surrounded by the elite soldiers of the tribes, they would not be able to finish them off in a short time. The tone of the battle here had been set from the beginning to be a war of attrition, so they could ignore it for the time being. However, hearing the sounds of killing, the experts of the caravan looked at each other and bowed. "Captain, this place is too dangerous. We should escort you down the mountain first." Shaking his head, Lan Shan narrowed his eyes and looked toward the southeast. "No rush. The situation is not stable yet. This place is high above the ground and is a good place to command." This was the truth. In terms of numbers, the army at the foot of the mountain outnumbered the unravel's by several times. However, one should not forget that the soldiers here were gathered from many tribes. Not to mention the tacit understanding between them, there might even be grudges in the past. In this way, if they were not careful, it was not impossible for the enemy to defeat them. The experts of the caravan had no choice but to send people down to gather all their companions and transfer hundreds of elite soldiers to build a stable defensive line around them. While waiting, the experts of the caravan from before were still staring at Tang In with unfriendly eyes, as if they were considering whether to kill this brand who had blasphemed their highness, in order to prevent bad news from spreading. "TCH, still looking? Bite me if you have the ability." Tang In grinned and glanced at them disdainfully. Then, under the indignant gazes of the experts, he walked to the east to see the miserable state of the experts who had chased after them. Of course, time was still short, and Tang In's thoughts were undoubtedly wishful thinking. The situation was still in a stalemate. A few miles away, on a mountainside, there were 7 or 8 places where all kinds of colorful gases were running rampant. The surrounding rocks and trees would shatter upon contact. It was truly an astonishing power. Under the continuous assault of the elite soldiers of the various tribes, the only thing the experts could do was to retreat step by step. However, they had not suffered any casualties yet. On the contrary, as soon as the tribal soldiers entered the black gas, they were immediately thrown out. Some of them were body parts, while some of them were still intact, but they could only roll down the slope. Among them, Tang In noticed a black-robed man at first glance. This didn't mean that he was extremely powerful, but that his fighting style was clearly different from other Northern Wilderness experts. As mentioned before, the Northern Wilderness tribes also had combat energy and magic. However, for the sake of balance, the gods of creation gave the people of the Northern Wilderness an insanely strong physique. On the other hand, they took away some of their martial arts talents. Therefore, most of the Northern Wilderness people's achievements in combat energy and magic were limited. Their high-end martial arts were obviously weaker than the brands. As a result, the Northern Wilderness simply blazed a new trail, deriving a different set of cultivation methods from various magical beasts. Subsequently, the Wilderness cult was born. Of course, Tang In wasn't clear on how the experts of the Northern Wilderness cultivated. All he could see was that when the Northern Wilderness experts fought, the various colored substances that resembled combat energy gushed out of their bodies and transformed into all kinds of ferocious magical beasts. For example, when Andre released his power, the black gas transformed into a single-horned magical beast that resembled a rhinoceros. The many Northern Wilderness experts before him were the same. There were lions, tigers, snakes, eagles. There were so many of them. Among them, lions were the most numerous. Perhaps because their techniques came from the same source, there were about 5 or 6 people who all transformed into ferocious lions. When they clawed, their power was no weaker than combat energy. Among them, There was a white-haired old man who was the strongest. The lion he transformed into was also the most lifelike, almost solid. It was also because of this that the faint silver glow of the black-robed man became the most eye-catching among them. The silver glow didn't transform into any magical beasts. On the contrary, it was extremely pure, just like combat energy. Bran's people. After a moment of shock, Tang instantly reacted. He couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. His first impression was that the other party was a barbarian from the northern wilderness. He didn't expect the pure combat energy to be from the Bran's people. This didn't mean that no one in the northern wilderness cultivated pure combat energy. It was just that although the black-robed man's face couldn't be seen due to his clothes, judging from his slender and thin body, he didn't look like a barbarian. Narrowing his eyes, this strength, earth-level beginner, tisk tisk, smacking his lips, Tang shook his head and thought to himself, with such high strength, he still came to this godforsaken place to be a traitor. He really has no future. But Tang immediately thought that if his identity was exposed, he wouldn't be able to find a place to stay in the Bran. He couldn't help but feel dispirited. Sylvia should be returning to the Bran soon. But it's not a big problem that she doesn't know my name and real appearance with such a messy thought. Tang didn't pay attention to the black-robed man anymore. He looked around and lifted his hand. A dagger formed by pure blood appeared out of thin air, but it instantly collapsed and disappeared into the whistling, cold wind. This was the Empyrean Bloodblade skill. Tang had been practicing it recently when he had nothing to do. Although he didn't succeed, he still had some experience. Vaguely, he seemed to have touched the threshold. Of course, it was hard to say whether it was an illusion or not. Under Tangen's observation, the battle situation didn't change significantly. The masters were still strong, and the soldiers were still attacking. If there were no accidents, the outcome would only be determined after these masters were exhausted. But the result would naturally be the soldiers' victory. It was just a matter of how long it would take and how many casualties there would be. This was the so-called no matter how high one's martial arts were, they were still afraid of a kitchen knife. No matter how strong one was in a one-on-one battle, they would still be defeated by a group of people. But as he glanced around, Tang frowned and looked back at the black-robed man again. It wasn't that Tang felt something was wrong. It was just that among the many sub-battlefields, only the black-robed man didn't retreat. Instead, he silently moved a few hundred meters forward. To be honest, this wasn't easy to do. Even a white-haired old barbarian, who was the strongest among them, had only managed to push 100 meters forward with great difficulty. He was still being suppressed by the barbarians. After observing carefully again, Tang nodded thoughtfully. It turned out that although the black-robed man's strength wasn't the strongest, his fighting style was quite clever. He didn't fight head-on like the white-haired old barbarian and the others. Instead, he relied on his body movement to attack. Most of the time, he would only injure but not kill. This allowed him to move forward easily. Seeing this, Tang couldn't help but sigh. Haha. Why else would people say that the people of the northern wilderness are stubborn and the people of the Bran are smart? This is an example. And a hero with a broken arm. After observing carefully, Tang found that the black-robed man who moved freely seemed to have both hands, just like an ordinary person. But in fact, his bulging left sleeve was empty. It was only supported by fighting energy, and there was no left arm at all. It seems like the people of the Bran, silver fighting energy, missing left arm, scratching his head, Tang suddenly had a familiar feeling. It was faint, but he couldn't get rid of it. What's going on? Have I seen him before? That can't be. This is the northern wilderness at this moment. Kill! 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 The earth-shattering battle cry and the sound of weapons clashing instantly came from the foot of the mountain, resounding through the sky. Deep in thought, Tang frowned and looked up. He saw a black mass of people fighting fiercely in the southeast direction of the mountain. Although he couldn't see clearly, the tragic smell of blood instantly rose to the sky, stirring people's hearts. Needless to say, it was the tens of thousands of traders who had finally arrived. This Anna was either courageous or, as Lan Shah had expected, his personality was prone to extremes. Anna naturally knew that the reinforcements from the tribe had entered the mountain on a large scale. And even if he didn't receive the news due to some special reasons, because of the sudden appearance of more than 10 masters, he didn't have time to set up an ambush. In other words, Anna's scouts would definitely be able to detect the situation here. But even so, he still led the soldiers to charge here. With such a crazy move, it was hard to guess whether his confidence was bursting or his stupidity suddenly exploded, causing his brain to suddenly short-circuit suddenly. With this interruption, Tang Yin's feeling of déjà vu toward the black-robed man undoubtedly faded a little. Shaking his head, he gathered the blood blade in his hand again and walked toward Lan Shah. Chapter 629. At a distance of about 100 meters, Twain's gaze was fixed on the battle at the foot of the mountain. His hands were constantly assembling and dispersing the blood blades. His mind was wandering as he thought about the black-robed man from before. The battle at the foot of the mountain had reached its climax almost immediately. Although Anna's personality was prone to extremes, it was undeniable that he had military talent. Now that he had clearly seen the weakness of the temporarily assembled forces, he immediately raised his hand and charged straight into the middle of the army. It was obvious that he wanted to take advantage of the fact that they had yet to stabilize themselves. The current battle situation was indeed as such. More than 10,000 rebel soldiers charged into the middle of the wild goose formation, completely disregarding the danger of being surrounded. They pushed forward step by step and charged straight into the middle of the army at the foot of the mountain. As the saying goes, one needs a heavy hammer to beat the drum. The rebel soldiers' barbaric and unreasonable fighting style instantly exposed the weakness of the middle of the army. Although there were 50,000 soldiers from each tribe, and they had an absolute advantage from the current situation, it looked like the enemy had the upper hand in terms of numbers. The middle of the army was retreating step by step, and the situation was precarious. Seeing this, Tang Yin raised his eyebrows and walked to Lan Shah's side. "How is it? Can you handle it? If Anna chooses to avoid the brunt of the attack, and I can't stay here for long, it will indeed be a little troublesome." But now, Lan Shah turned to look at Tang Yin, his expression calm. "It's not a big problem." "Oh." He waved his hand and pointed down the mountain. "Although these 10,000 rebel soldiers are at their peak, they won't last long. I deliberately let them pass through the middle of the mountain. Once they completely enter, the two wings will quickly close in. At that time, we will see the results." "Tisk, that's easy to understand." "But—" Tang Yin glanced at the calm Lan Shah and laughed. "Haha, aren't you worried that the enemy will directly break through the army's morale?" "Haha, that's impossible." Lan Shah also chuckled, somewhat mockingly. He narrowed his eyes and said, "Because they don't even know where I am." Tang Yin was stunned when he heard this. When he came back to his senses, he couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. Yes, because of the sudden appearance of more than 10 experts, they were already halfway up the mountain. Anna naturally didn't know about this. Right now, he was leading his troops to attack fiercely towards the rear of the central army. Naturally, he thought that Lan Shah was there. That's right. Usually, when two armies faced off against each other, their commanders would be there. But Lan Shah just happened to be on the mountain right now. In other words, Anna had chosen the wrong target from the very beginning when he led more than 10,000 rebels to fight to the death. Under such circumstances, if Anna wanted to win and successfully capture Lan Shah, he would have to kill all 50,000 soldiers here. It had to be said that this was simply a tragedy. Just like in an archery competition, if one party mistook the other party's target for their own, then the outcome would naturally be self-evident. Realizing this, Tang Yin looked down at the tens of thousands of rebel soldiers and could not help but sigh. This Anna, he is really an honest person. As the saying went, walking the same path to the end was just like this. There is a certain element of gambling in war, but wanting to win by gambling alone is undoubtedly laughable. Lan Shah narrowed her eyes and looked towards the center of the rebel army. Of course, with her eyesight, she naturally couldn't see it, but Anna was definitely there. Only an armchair strategist would make such a low-level mistake. Sigh. Master in Shui has been wise all his life, but perhaps he has made a mistake in protecting his juniors too much. He has harmed Anna and the tens of thousands of warriors. Tang Yin shrugged and laughed disapprovingly. Worry for nothing. Since the other party is determined to kill you, it's only natural that you kill them back. Shaking her head slightly, Lan Sha seemed to disagree with this statement, but there was indeed no need to explain too much. Seeing that the rebel soldiers had not completely entered the encirclement, she asked casually, "You just went to the eastern mountain peak. What's the situation there?" "What else can it be? They're all experts. It's impossible to take them down in a short time. It's like when you surrounded us in the Forbidden Valley." Tang Yin also replied casually, but then he touched his forehead. "Oh, right, there's also something strange. There are quite a few brand experts in your tribe?" Lan Sha turned her head in surprise. "Why? Is there a brand among the people chasing after you?" "Yes, and one with a broken arm." Nodding, Lan Sha looked at Tang Yin thoughtfully. "There are indeed quite a few brand people in the tribe. Most of them fled here after committing crimes on your side. For example, you were chased by people from the Temple of Light. Since you can escape, it means that you're extraordinary. So, as long as you don't do anything outrageous in the northern wilderness, the tribes will naturally try to recruit you." Paused for a while, then said, "Of course, after all, you're from the brand. It's not suitable for people like you to appear in the northern wilderness. So most of the people who are recruited are either strategists or simply trained to be guards or assassins. But you don't have to do this. As long as you can make a telescope, I naturally have a way to let you enjoy a noble status in the northern wilderness." Touching his nose, Tang Yin glanced at the shocked expressions of the experts beside him and said, "We've discussed this topic before. I'm not interested in this." "Don't rush to refuse." Shaking his head slightly, Lan Sha said calmly, "I just want to tell you that as long as you agree, any conditions that are not too excessive can be discussed." Do you know the brand expert just now? Although he has committed a heinous crime, I can spare his life on account of you." Tang Yin was stunned when he heard this, and quickly waved his hand. "You've really misunderstood. I don't know him." He kept muttering, but a flash of lightning suddenly flashed across his brain. Then, Tang Yin's expression suddenly changed, and he grabbed his hair with both hands and squatted down, frowning. "Wait, let me think. Temple of Light's pursuit. Brand silver fighting aura, broken left arm." More than 10,000 rebel soldiers at the foot of the mountain had completely entered the encirclement, and they were still pushing forward with unstoppable force. Lan Sha, who was supposed to give orders, turned around in surprise and looked at Tang Yin, who was extremely confused, and his thin eyebrows could not help but slowly frown. One day and one night was not too long, but in the process of being constantly pursued, Lan Sha of course knew what kind of ability the brand beside him had. Unfathomable strength, precise control over a small area, and creative inventions that were strange but practical. To be honest, Lan Sha was indeed shocked. Otherwise, with her status, why would she keep arguing with the other party over the recruitment issue? But now, this guy who took the initiative to enter the encirclement of more than 10,000 people, and then came out with ease, actually had such an expression on his face in an instant, and there was even a faint hint of fear. This naturally made Lan Sha particularly puzzled, and he paid special attention to it. Suddenly, Tang Yin, who was squatting and thinking hard, suddenly stood up, holding his forehead, and his expression was distorted. "Isn't this King Yama?" "Yama." Lan Sha raised his eyebrows. "Who is this?" "This is..." Before Tang Yin could explain, suddenly, boom, a violent explosion suddenly came from afar. When everyone turned their heads, they saw a silver light pillar shooting up to the sky from the east, domineering and awe-inspiring. CK. If he was a little uncertain or unwilling to be sure just now, looking at this attack that was obviously not from a beginner Earth stage warrior, Tang no longer had any doubts. He quickly reached out and grabbed Lan Sha's shoulder, and his figure quickly retreated. Run! The surrounding experts of the caravan regained their senses at this warning, and before they could understand what was going on, they saw that Highness Lan Sha had been taken away by Tang Yin and hurriedly chased after him in shock. Damn it, what are you doing? Put him down. Put your sister down. Tang and did not even turn his head, and his figure flashed out like a ghost. You King, turn around and look. Hearing this, the experts of the caravan subconsciously turned around, and their bodies suddenly trembled, and their eyes widened. Not far from the east, as soon as the silver light pillar disappeared, they saw a black-robed person standing in the air, slowly rising into the air. In the instant they looked over, the black-robed person seemed to have sensed something and turned his head to look over. Whoosh! The hood was blown off by the cold wind, and a head of long silver hair fluttered wantonly in the wind. Probably because he had discovered his target, the black-robed person's mouth curled into a sneer, and then his slowly rising figure suddenly floated in a straight line, floating in the air. A void stage warrior? This was obvious. Everyone knew that, other than mages, only warriors above the void stage could fly freely in the sky. Realizing this, the experts of the caravan gasped in unison, and as they looked at each other, their brains went numb. Not daring to say anything more, they turned around and ran wildly. At this moment, it was not only Tang In and the others who were equally shocked. In fact, even Elder Lei and the others who came looked at the black-robed person floating in the air in a daze, speechless for a long time. Of course, they knew that the other party was one of the brand's people, but they did not know that the other party's strength was actually so high. Otherwise, even if the middle-aged barbarian had eaten a bear's heart and a leopard's guts, he would not have dared to provoke them so arrogantly. And some of the insiders finally understood why the middle-aged barbarian and his companion had disappeared in horror when they reflected on whether they had offended the other party before. Previously, they had thought that the other party had accidentally died in battle, but now looking at the black-robed person floating in the air, there was no doubt that they understood. Seeing the black-robed person disappear on the other side of the mountain, Elder Lei took a deep breath and suddenly jumped out with a roar. Gather here and kill. It had to be said that while everyone on the mountain was shocked by the black-robed person's strength, it undoubtedly gave Elder Lei and the other experts an opportunity. Of course, escaping down the mountain was undoubtedly impossible. Now, they could only gather together and kill in the direction where the black-robed person disappeared to have a chance of completing the mission and successfully escaping. At this time, needless to say, the black-robed person was naturally Yema. In fact, generally speaking, Yema was a typical example of a person with a bad fate. After the battle with Zwafan and the threshold of the void level, he immediately ran to the deep mountains and forests to fight with various demon beasts, hoping to make a breakthrough in the battle. But what happened next made him completely at a loss. He just felt that it was a little strange that Sang Pu and the others did not come back to look for demon beasts with him for a long time. So, when Yema came out of the deep mountains and forests, he was shocked to find that he had become a leader without an army and was a national wanted criminal. In anger, he went to seek revenge, but inexplicably, he was hit by the sword of a low-level thief and was seriously injured. Then, before his injury was healed, the people of the Temple of Light came to find him. After a fierce battle, he lost his left arm and fled to the northern wilderness. Such a tragic experience. Just listening to it would make one's face fill with tears. Needless to say, the person involved was Yema. There was no need to elaborate on what happened after that. After escaping to the northern wilderness, Yema knew that he would not be able to return to Bulin for the time being. Coincidentally, he met a big shot who invited him to the Battle Lions tribe. Bounty hunters were professions that prioritized benefits above all else. Yema felt that he did not have any grudges against his own country. In addition, his injuries were not light, so he decided to join the War Lions tribe. He had found a temporary foothold in the northern wilderness. And because of his injuries, when Yema joined the War Lions tribe, his strength was of course not at his peak. He was probably at the early stage of the Earth level. As the saying goes, when you go out, you have to hold back a trick or two. Naturally, Yema would not go around announcing his true strength. Over time, everyone only thought that he was at the early stage of the Earth level. Because of this, some northern wilderness masters like the middle-aged barbarian who were very unhappy with the brand would repeatedly provoke him. After all, Yema was from the brand. In addition, he disdained to make a move on these clowns. So, he usually ignored these kinds of actions. Of course, if the middle-aged barbarian dared to come to him in a remote place, he would not mind killing him. As for this pursuit of Tang In, it was completely because he was paid to do it. After all, he had been recuperating in the War Lions tribe until now. Moreover, there were benefits to be reaped after the mission was completed. So, Yema once again became a bounty hunter. Of course, if Yema knew that the culprit who caused the complete annihilation of the bounty hunter group and put him in such a sorry state was right in front of him, the result would be really hard to predict. A void-level warrior. How is that possible? Lan Sha, who was once again being carried away by Tang Un, turned around and looked at Yema, who was in the air. His face could not help but turn pale. Whether it was in the Bran or the northern wilderness, void-level warriors were rare existences. What's more, in the open and secret struggles between the tribes, if the War Lions tribe recruited a Bran void-level warrior, there was no reason for Lan Sha not to know. But now, the truth was right in front of her. Moreover, this void-level warrior was so close to her. There was no time to prepare and calculate it all. Therefore, in the face of this kind of overwhelming tyrannical power, even the calm Lan Sha was terrified at this time. He's not void-level. At most, he can only see the threshold. Tang In, who was in a hurry, glanced in Yema's direction and said casually. He was rushing forward in a straight line. Tang was not just saying this. When Yema first glimpsed the void level, he was watching from the side. Now it seemed that after this period of time, Yema still had not entered the void level. He did not even have half a step like Zhou Fan. Of course, this was not to say that Yema's talent was not good. To be able to cultivate to this level, his talent was basically unquestionable. It was just that the threshold of the void level was too difficult to cross. There were many Earth-level masters in the world, but in the end, how many could become a void-level warrior? Of course, it could not be ruled out that Yema spent most of his time recuperating and did not have time to think about breaking through. The reason why Tang In could see that Yema had not broken through to the void level was because of the previous situation. It was easy to imagine that if Yema was already a void-level warrior, or even if he only had 1 foot in, before, he did not even need to move 1,000 meters in this direction. Then he flew in the air and flew over the heads of the tribal soldiers. The next scene undoubtedly confirmed Tang In's guess. When Yema arrived at the position where Tang In and the others were standing before, he slowly landed. He frowned and looked over here, then directly ran over. Lan Sha saw this, and her eyes lit up. Obviously, she also saw this point. She hurriedly asked, "Arthur, how much is the difference in strength between you and him?" Grinning, Tang In could not help but shake his head and smile bitterly. "Ha, sister, you think too highly of me. Even if it's just a threshold, he's still a void level. Let's put it this way. Compared to him, other than speed, I'm trash." Lan Sha heard this and was speechless. She was indeed naive. Yema was a void-level warrior after all. Naturally, Tang In could not compete with him now. Of course, Tang In's speed was also the truth. In terms of straight-line speed, without any assistance, there were not many people in the world who could catch up to him. At least, Tang In had not seen anyone who could. It was also because of this advantage that they were not directly killed when they came into contact with Yema Pu. But this good situation would not last long. Tang In could only move forward in a straight line. This way, he could offset Yema's flying advantage. As for going up the mountain to hide, or going down the mountain to ask for help, it was impossible. After all, No matter how fast his legs were, it was impossible to be faster than flying. In fact, even if he was running on the ground, Yemal was still worthy of his strength. Although he was not as abnormal as Tang Yin, but in a moment, he still caught up with the caravan experts. Fortunately, Yemal's target was clear, or more likely, it was because he did not care, so he did not attack the caravan experts. Otherwise, they would be dead in an instant. The area of this cliff was indeed vast, but could not withstand Tang in straight-line speed. After running for less than 10 minutes, Tang Yin looked at the slope in front of him. He had no choice but to take a detour, and Yemal, who was a little depressed from chasing behind, could not help but chuckle. His body suddenly rose into the air again and flew in a straight line. Seeing that the distance between the two sides was getting shorter and shorter, Lan Sha's expression had already recovered. But that was just the habit of a superior. Even if he was about to die, he had to maintain the calmness that matched his status. Facing the strong wind, Lan Sha narrowed his eyes and calmly reminded Yemal Pu, "We will reach the cliff in the north in 5 minutes." "I know," a dull reply. Tang Yin's long and narrow eyes narrowed slightly. He licked his dry lips and said, "Do you have any suggestions?" "Yes. Compared to being captured alive, I'd rather jump off the cliff." "TSK. If that's the case, why don't you tell me the location of the antidote? After all, one person dying is better than 2 people dying. And I can promise to avenge you in the future." "I really appreciate your humor at this moment." Huh. Chapter 630. Haha. Hearing the laughter that came with the wind, Yemal frowned and said expressionlessly, "I'd like to see where you can run to." It had to be said that Tang Un's absolute speed had shocked Yemal quite a bit. Even though he was stronger, he was undoubtedly the loser in this contest of pure speed. Of course, Yemal had already seen the cliff in front of him. Once he reached there, his opponent would naturally have nowhere to run. 5.5 minutes later, Tang Un's lightning-fast figure came to an emergency stop. He looked at the swirling cold wind in front of him and shook his head slightly. In fact, based on the distance between them, he could still escape for a while, but it was undoubtedly meaningless. Lan Sha shook her shoulders and took the initiative to break free from Tang Yin's hand. She took a deep breath and said calmly, "It's a good place. Thank you. Thank you for letting me choose how to die. There's no hurry. It won't be too late for you to jump off the cliff after I die." Tang Yin turned around and looked at Yemal in the distance with narrowed eyes. Waves of bloody light suddenly rose around his body and shrunk. Lan Sha was surprised at first, but then she nodded silently and quickly walked to the side. Of course, she did not think that Tang Yin could defeat Yemal, but she understood Tang Yin's current mentality. To a certain extent, they were the same kind of people. Even if there was no chance of survival, as long as they were alive and could breathe, they would resolutely choose to fight to the end. The gloomy light and swirling cold wind howled on the cliff like a demon's howl. About 30 seconds later, Yemal, who was dressed in a black robe, flew to the top of the cliff. He stopped and stood in the air. His expression was cold and arrogant, and his silver hair danced wildly. He looked just like a king who looked down on the world. He lowered his head and looked at Lan Sha not far away. Then he shifted his gaze to Tang Yin, who was diagonally below him. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly into an emotionless smile. Whoosh! He only glanced at him and did not attack. However, the bloody light around Tang Yin suddenly shone brightly. A bloody and tragic aura instantly filled the air. Tang Yin's fighting spirit was awe-inspiring. Actually, as an assassin, it was inappropriate for him to accumulate strength in such a high-profile manner. However, Tang Yin knew that if he didn't circulate the blood and qi in his body and adjust his body to its peak condition in the shortest time possible, he wouldn't have any chance to attack. "Ha!" A mocking chuckle was heard. Then, a black shadow flashed, and Yemal's figure instantly disappeared in the air. When he reappeared, he was already above Lan Sha. Then his right hand grabbed downwards. That's right, Yemal's first target was Lan Sha, who was also the target of his mission. As for Tang Yin, to be honest, he was just like the few experts from the caravan just now. He did not have the qualifications to be taken seriously. When it came to long-distance running, it was already proven that Yema's speed was not as fast as Tangen's. However, in terms of instantaneous burst of power, experts of the same level were actually not much different. However, Tangen was such a freak. His instantaneous explosive power was even more astonishing than his long-distance speed. Yema's bloody fist went against the momentum. Bang! The bloody light and silver light intersected. A ring-shaped ripple instantly exploded in the narrow space. Tangen's ramrod-straight body seemed to be pressed down by a mountain. He suddenly became shorter. In fact, it was because his legs had sunk 1 foot into the ground. As for Yema, his right hand that was grabbing downwards had already been pushed away. His body swayed, and he floated up more than 3 meters. There was no doubt that Yema had been careless. He originally only wanted to capture Lan Sha. However, when he saw Tang and suddenly inserted himself between the two of them, he quickly increased his strength. In this case, one of them was intentional, while the other was unintentional. Naturally, Tang In had a small advantage. As the saying went, there was no expert in a fight, and as the saying went, a bastard would not take advantage of an advantage. Upon seeing this, Tang Un's expression became stern. He stomped his right foot. Bang! Crushed stones flew everywhere. His body instantly pulled up from the ground. With a whistling bloody light, he directly pounced on Yema in the air. As there was no way to borrow strength from the void, Yema had just stabilized his body when Tang In instantly approached him. In an instant, bloody lines crisscrossed and densely packed spots of blood covered the front of his body. However, he was naturally not afraid. He was even a little angry. It was the kind of anger that came from being challenged by an insignificant ant. With a wave of his hand, he pulled out an explosive silver light with one hand and pressed it down on Yema's head. Bang, bang, bang. In just an instant, under the dazzling light, Tang In and Yema's figures disappeared in midair. Only the dense sounds of collision that sounded like raindrops hitting banana leaves could be heard. Waves of ripples could also be seen in the void. Of course, Tang In did not have the ability to stand in midair. However, his ghost-like body movement was enough to allow him to borrow any insignificant power to stay in midair for a short period of time. Fortunately, the two were fighting in midair, giving Lan Sha enough time to escape. Otherwise, under the scattered light, she would have no choice but to jump off the cliff. Glancing at the battle in midair, Lan Sha's expression was shocked at this time. She did not expect Tang In's combat power to be so strong. Even in the face of a void stage cultivator, he did not seem to be at a disadvantage. However, just as this thought appeared, Lan Sha's eyes suddenly lit up, and then in her line of sight, balls of silver light were as big as silver plates, floating in the air like the rising sun, dazzling brilliance. The next moment, the rising sun suddenly exploded, instantly radiating a magnificent silver light. Bang, bang, bang in a violent roar, wherever the silver light touched, stones, ancient trees, mountains, and so on immediately collapsed, and pits were everywhere. This power was like countless exploding crystals suddenly scattered from the sky. Dust filled the air. It was chaotic. Although Lan Sha retreated 100 meters away, she still staggered and fell to the ground. Fortunately, she did not fall off the cliff. However, she had no time to care about such danger. As soon as she landed, she immediately looked up and narrowed her eyes, looking at the sorry figure in the silver light. The light was dazzling. She could not see clearly, but there was no doubt that it was Tang In. At this time, Tang In's situation was not good. Even Lan Sha, who did not know martial arts, could see that he was sent flying. In the air, his body could not borrow strength, and at this time, a large area of dense silver light poured down at this moment. Cough, cough. Empty kill. In the series of explosions, Lan Sha seemed to hear such a clear voice, and then in front of her eyes, she saw Tang In's figure in midair sway slightly, and more than 10 vague figures suddenly appeared in the surrounding area, making it difficult to distinguish between real and fake. A surprised voice sounded, and the silver light radiated. The more than 10 figures of Tang and were hit one after another, and like a light smoke, they immediately disappeared without a trace. Did he dodge it? Clenching the hem of her clothes, Lan Sha stared at the battle in midair, and she could not help but feel nervous. But at this time, the sound of something rolling suddenly came from the left side. Lan Sha suddenly turned her head, and her narrowed eyes could not help but widen slightly. She saw a figure appear there, rolling along the mountain until it reached a protruding mountain rock. Then it stretched out a palm and slapped the ground, and jumped up to the top of the mountain rock. Ragged clothes, bleeding from the corner of his mouth, and almost falling down from the mountain rock. Wasn't that Tang Nun? But when did he come over? How did he dodge that terrifying silver light? In fact, Lan Sha's question was easy to explain. Tang In only had a flash of inspiration at the critical moment and changed the aerial kill skill that was originally used to attack to escape. One must know that Tang Un's aerial kill skill was not low. Once it was activated, it could transform into more than 10 figures, and when attacking, it could directly appear in front of the target as if ignoring space. So what was more suitable than the aerial kill skill to escape in the air? Huff, huff, F***CK. One unlucky year. Gasping for breath, Tang In wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and straightened his body again and stared at the sky. After this short exchange, Tang In truly felt the gap between his strength and Yema's. Although the other party only saw the threshold of Void stage, it sounded similar to the peak of Earth stage. But the real situation was that the difference of a hair's breadth was 1,000 miles. Tang In could compete with Sylvia, who was at the peak of Earth stage, and they were only a hair's breadth apart. But in front of Yema, he did not have the slightest chance. This was the difference between their realms, and it was like a natural chasm. His ghostly body movement, incredible assassination skills, powerful close combat skills, and so on could not unleash the power that he should have in front of Yema's absolute strength. This was a real, hopeless situation. It was not very cold at the top, and the howling cold wind blew past, and soon, the smoke and dust that filled the air above the battlefield were cleared. Gradually, Yema's figure appeared in the sight of the two people below. He was still wearing a black robe, and he was hovering in the air, but he was much higher than before. From the outside, he did not seem to be injured, and he did not look as pathetic as Tang In. The only obvious difference from before was that his left sleeve, which was originally empty, was now torn from his shoulder. As the saying goes, hit where it hurts. Since Yema's left arm was broken, Tang In would definitely not let go of this slightly weaker side when he attacked. Because of this, Yema's left sleeve was torn into pieces by the dagger. Yema glanced at the torn part of his black robe on his left shoulder, then narrowed his eyes at Tang In, who was on the mountain rock. His expression was cold. Interesting. Tang In did not reply. Instead, he stretched out his left hand and pointed at the ground. Then, he lifted his chin slightly, opened his palm, and waved at Yema. His meaning was obvious. Come down and fight me if you dare. It was a little arrogant, but also a little provocative. Yema's expression darkened when he saw this. His eyes were as cold as a vulture's, and they kept emitting waves of cold air. Most of the time, actions were more powerful than words. Yes, of course, this was a provocation. If it were in the past, Yema would not have cared. This was not a matter of whether he had the guts or not. Since he could fly in the air, why should he listen to Yema and land on the ground? Why should he give up his advantage to have a so-called fair fight with Yema? This was not a matter of courage, but of intelligence. But now, Tang In fought fiercely with him in the air. Not only did he not die, but he also gained some advantage. Although the advantage was very small, it was an absolute humiliation when compared to the disparity in strength between the two of them. Therefore, the meaning of Tang In's provocation was different as the situation changed. In short, Tang In had used facts to prove that he was qualified to challenge Yema. So, did Yema dare to accept the challenge? Chapter 631. Thud, thud, thud. Just as the scene fell into a short silence due to Tangen's provocation, the experts from the caravan who had been lagging behind finally arrived at the south side of the craggy rocks. Their footsteps paused as they stared blankly at Tangen. "Don't come over, retreat." Lan Sha waved his hand and ordered coldly. She knew very well that although Tang had escaped from Yema's hands before, it did not mean that her loyal guards could do the same. In fact, if they came over, not only would they lose their lives in vain, they might even disrupt Tang's current strategy. Yema glanced at Lan Sha, then looked at Tang and again. He narrowed his eyes and suddenly chuckled a few times with a hint of mockery. It was as if he was laughing at an ant who dared to challenge a lion. Then he waved his right arm, and a whistling silver light pierced through the air and went straight for Tangen's head. This kind of long-range attack naturally could not hurt Tang Yin. With just a flash, Tang Yin floated down the rocks and moved more than 10 steps away. Boom! Under this silver light, the rocks seemed to be made of flour and were directly blasted into powder. At this time, Yema's black robe fluttered, and his figure slowly descended with a great deterrent force. When he was about 50 meters away from Tang Yin, his feet finally touched the ground. The corner of his mouth twitched. "Congratulations. Congratulations on getting what you wanted, and congratulations on successfully angering me." Then, his voice was cold, and his figure suddenly burst forward. His right palm was shining with silver thunder. "You can die now." Ha ha ha! With a happy laugh, Tang evaded the tyrannical silver light like a ghost, and an imperceptible bloodline slanted towards Yema's throat. His tone was also mocking. "Who do you think you are?" The bloody dagger was slapped away halfway, but in the next moment, it flashed to Yema's left side and stabbed directly at his heart. "In fact, you're not even a void-level warrior. You just know how to fly." Yema frowned slightly. It was not because he was affected by the mocking words, but because he realized that the other party's body seemed to be even more slippery on the ground. In addition, after losing his left arm, the left side of his body became an unavoidable weakness, and his attacks were always a beat slower because of it. In this way, even if each of his attacks had the ability to kill his opponent, it would be useless if he couldn't hit him. I can understand. Is it because of your condescending gaze that you have developed the laughable mentality of viewing all living beings as ants? Ha! Tang Yin flashed to the left side of Yema's body again amidst the afterimages. The dagger's target was still Yema's heart. "Stop dreaming. You're not a god." Silver light flashed and directly shook the dagger away. However, the palm that followed still did not hit the target. Anger started to accumulate between Yemo's brows. He suddenly realized that the man's voice was a little annoying. It was like a fly that kept buzzing around him. "At best, you're just a bird man." The afterimages suddenly stopped 1 foot away from Yemo. Taking advantage of this gap, Tang Yin slightly curled the corner of his mouth, revealing an undisguised, sarcastic smile. Then, he evaded Yemo's next attack like a ghost. "Oh, sorry, I forgot that you've already lost an arm." Then, "Birdman with broken wings?" In the mocking laughter, Yemo's chest slightly moved up and down, and his eyes became even colder. The experts of the caravan not far away saw this and opened their mouths. They were completely stunned. Of course, they knew that this madman brand's strength was not bad, and his body movement was even better, but they never thought that he could actually fight Yema head-on and still not be at a disadvantage. And, provoking a void-level warrior like this, looking at each other, these people's faces were incomparably ridiculous. When did the world become so crazy? Of course, people like Lan Sha secretly thought about the reason why Tang wanted to die like this. Angering the opponent? That was for sure. But with such strength, other than causing more violent revenge, what else could it do? If Tang knew what Lan Sha was thinking right now, he would probably curse her out of exasperation, because at this moment, the violent revenge that Lan Sha was thinking about came. Roar! With a roar, the field lit up again, and the disc-like silver Do Chi appeared again, instantly radiating to the whole field. Yima was infuriated. Of course, no one would be able to stand being surrounded by flies that were spitting out venomous tongues. When Yima landed on the ground, he originally planned to kill the opponent to prove that whether it was in the sky or on the ground, he could kill the opponent without any suspense. But after fighting for a while, Yima was shocked to find that his attack speed could not catch up with the opponent, so naturally, he could not kill the opponent. In addition, Tang Un's shameless ridicule just now made Yima change his attack method. He planned to directly use his power to suppress the opponent. Yima's full power was terrifying, and the silver dough chi spread out like mercury. Tang Un had already realized that things were not going well. He was shocked and wanted to retreat, but no matter how fast he could not be faster than the silver dough chi. About 30 meters away from Yima, Tang Un was caught up by the spreading silver dough chi, and his ghostly figure could not help but stop. And this was the opportunity that Yima wanted to attack. His figure instantly shot forward, and his face was ferocious as he slammed his palm down. The silver dough chi was only used to restrict, and it did not have the special effect of stopping everything in its range, at least for people like Tang Un. Therefore, Tang Un could barely dodge the first attack. But Yima had already used his power to suppress the opponent, so naturally, he would not let Tang Un go so easily. Then the second palm slammed down on the head. Seeing this, Tang Un knew that he could not avoid this attack no matter what, so he decisively threw away the dagger, and with a roar, the blood dough chi burst out like a tide. He put his palms together and blocked the attack. Boom! The blood dough chi shattered, and a spatial ripple visible to the naked eye instantly spread out. Not far away, the few loyal experts of the caravan did not listen to Lan Shah's advice and retreat in time, so they could not escape from the silver dough chi. Now that they were hit by the ripple, their chests felt like they were hit by a galloping horse. Their throats were sweet, and they spat out a large amount of blood mist. If the experts of the caravan were like this, Tang Un, as the person involved, was even more so. As soon as the collision began, his brain felt as if there were thousands of golden gongs ringing at the same time, full of buzzing sounds. Then, the mountain-like pressure on his arms instantly pressed down, and the bones all over his body groaned together, the pain penetrating into the bone marrow. For a moment, Tang Un felt as if his body had been crushed into powder by this palm, just like the rock that had suddenly appeared out of nowhere earlier. Roaring through his teeth, Tang Un raised his arms high to protect the vital parts of his head. His defense was not smashed open, but his feet were lighter, and his waist had completely sunk into the stone ground of the mountain. This was the furious attack of a Void Grade Master. It was really terrifying. And this was just the beginning. Lifting his palm lightly, Yima looked at Tang Un, who was still intact, and raised his eyebrows slightly, seemingly a little surprised. But then he took a slight breath, and the silver dough chi wrapped around his palm like flowing water, as if it had doubled in size out of thin air, and slammed down again expressionlessly. Roar! With a loud roar, Tang Un crossed his fists, and his left and right hands instantly changed positions. First, he slightly retracted his hand, and then the blood dough chi on his arms erupted again, directly blocking the attack. Boom! Chi chi chi. In the muffled sound of the collision, with the area where the two fought as the center, the surrounding stone ground instantly cracked, and then like a spider web, it continued to spread to the periphery. Finally, with a loud crash, half of Tang Un's body sank instantly, completely disappearing into the ground, falling into a large pit. Hiss! The masters of the caravan who had just been hit by the spear were unlucky, but after being sent flying 7 or 8 meters away, they were lucky enough to avoid the more ferocious second impact. So when they had time to watch the battle, they couldn't help but gasp, and a chill ran down their spines. Previously, although they were also in awe of Yima, after seeing him repeatedly fail to hit Tang Un, they couldn't help but think that this was all there was to it. But now that they saw Yemo's palm really hit the ground, as if he was hammering iron directly into Madman Bran, they truly felt the horror of a void grade master. Even so, they couldn't help but secretly admire Tang Un, who had dodged several attacks before. This kind of battle was simply inhuman, right? Was that Madman Bran still alive? Chapter 632. A cold wind blew past. The hole was deep, with large and small stones piled up inside. Occasionally, rotten plant roots could be seen among them. It looked like a ruin. Yemo's black robe fluttered as he hovered above the ruins of the hole. He lowered his head and narrowed his eyes as if he was trying to determine whether the person was dead or not. Then, he curled his lips slightly and stretched out his right hand toward the hole. He opened his 5 fingers. Whoosh! The silver fighting spirit gathered and formed a round plate again. It was a simple principle. Regardless of whether the person was dead or not, he would know after the explosion. Whoosh! The silver plate flew out, leaving a silver trail behind it as it fell straight into the hole below. There was no doubt that this attack could definitely plow through everything in the hole again. At this moment, suddenly, bang, gravel flew everywhere. A figure shot out of the hole before the silver plate landed. As soon as he touched the ground, he quickly flew to the side and rolled on the ground. In the next moment, boom, the hole behind him that had been destroyed repeatedly exploded again. Waves of air rose and stone powder flew everywhere, stirring up the area. Puff! The figure's reaction was fast, and his dodging movements were not standard. However, when he was hit by the waves of air, he could not help but spit out a large amount of blood. However, he did not stop retreating at all. With the help of the waves of air, his speed increased, and he instantly rushed out of the range of the silver plate's explosion. Arthur, Lan Shah, who had already hidden a few hundred meters away, narrowed her eyes because the figure was retreating in the northwest direction. She could not help but bite her lips and murmur after recognizing the figure. Naturally, the person who escaped from the hole without delay could only be Tang Un. However, Tang Un's appearance was really embarrassing now. His hair was disheveled, and his face was covered in dust. What was more terrifying was that his facial features were bleeding and there were stains on his face. It was a ghastly sight. Tang Un's blood-red eyes swept around. His chest was heaving up and down like a broken bellows. When he saw Lan Shah, his eyes flashed, and he quietly reached out his hand to point at the cliff. This movement was very subtle and disappeared in a flash. However, Lan Shah undoubtedly saw it. She blinked and looked a little puzzled. However, after thinking for 3 seconds, she got up from hiding behind the mountain rock and walked to the cliff. At this moment, things are getting more and more interesting. With a soft chuckle, Yemo, who was a few feet above the ground, passed through the smoke and dust. He watched in amazement as Tang Un slowly descended. I have to say, you've given me a great surprise. That includes your previous speed and your current powerful body. This wasn't a joke, but a true statement from the bottom of his heart. Being able to cultivate to his current level, Yemo's experience was abundant. But even so, he had never seen a cultivator as strange as Tang Un. His speed was as swift as the wind, his terrifying, instantaneous, explosive power, and his seemingly indestructible body. All of these brought quite a bit of shock to Yemo, and even a little bit of fear. Putting everything else aside, at least Yemo was sure that when he was at the same level as the other party, he definitely didn't have such powerful combat strength. Tang Un did not respond to the compliment. He raised his hand to wipe away the blood under his nose and turn around. His face was covered in dust, and his white teeth were covered in blood. He revealed a brilliant smile. Then he raised his hand toward Yemo, bent his fingers, and waved his hand again. It's useless to talk. Let's fight. It was still a provocation, and it was still that annoying look. Seeing this, Yemo's gaze turned cold, and he frowned in disgust. Originally, since we're both from the brand, before he could finish speaking, Tang Un shouted coldly, "Noisy." Then he instantly turned around and ran toward the sparse forest beside the cliff. Yema was stunned for a moment, and monstrous anger instantly surged out of his heart. His face was ashen. He was an expert, after all. In a situation where he could completely control the situation of the battle, he would either directly kill his opponent and end the matter, or he would like to say some indifferent words, perhaps to humiliate his opponent, or perhaps to enjoy the pleasure of killing. To be honest, this was beyond reproach. The weak were prey to the strong in the world. If you didn't want to be humiliated or wanted to humiliate others to enjoy the pleasure, then you just had to ensure that your strength was higher than others. If your strength was lower, then you could only pinch your nose and accept your fate. Don't blame the heavens or others. Of course, even if you did, you would still have to die. But that was not the case for Tangen. His strength was lower than Yema's, but he looked even more arrogant than Yema. It had to be said that this was the legendary act of courting death. At that moment, the silver light that Yema had released had yet to fade away. Because of it, Tangen would not be able to get far. Trying to run, Yema growled, and the mercury-like silver light spread out again, causing ripples to appear. And every time the ripples spread out, Tangen had to stop for a moment. After just 2 ripples, Yema, with a cold expression, charged toward him again. Without another word, he swung his huge silver palm at him. This time, Tangen did not choose to block the attack horizontally. Instead, he took a step back and pushed forward with his bloody hands. Bang! When he received the attack, his body looked as if it had been hit by a 10,000-pound hammer, and he was sent flying while blood filled the air. Oof! I came down as you wished. Yema snorted coldly. Before Tangen could land on the ground, Yema instantly appeared before him and swung his palm again expressionlessly. But you've disappointed me greatly. Ah! Tangen roared. He managed to stabilize himself in the air and faced Yema's huge silver palm with one hand. Bang! Crack! The clear sound of bones breaking could be heard amidst the impact. His right arm immediately went limp, and his body crashed heavily on the ground. Bang! The moment Tangen landed on the ground, he flipped away. But before he could get up completely, Yema appeared before him again. Bang! 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 On the ground, in the air. Palm strikes, elbow strikes, knee strikes. Tangen was covered in a bloody glow, but there was even more blood on his body. He looked like a real sandbag. He kept retreating under all kinds of attacks. He did not know how much blood he spat out, and he did not know how many bones in his body were broken. All he could do was to raise his arm to block every attack, regardless of whether it was useful or not. As for the rest, he just let Yema do whatever he wanted. Suppress, suppress, and continue to suppress. This was the suppression of absolute strength. There was no logic to it. In front of Yema, who was willing to risk everything, Tangen's speed, skills, assassination techniques, and so on were all fake. The elites from the merchant group were completely stunned. They did not even see Elder Lei and the others running toward them. Of course, when the latter got close, he also stopped in his tracks and looked at the situation in a daze. There was no need to talk about Yema's strength. He could sweep through the entire place without any pressure. But who was the person being beaten up? That was right. He did not have any strength to fight back, but he could still maintain his consciousness after taking so many heavy blows from Yema. He even stretched out his arm to block the attacks accurately. This was insane. Of course, even though they were shocked, no one thought that Tangen could continue to hold on. What kind of joke was this? With such heavy blows, even someone as hard as cold iron would break. Except for Lan Sha. Actually, Lan Sha was not sure himself. After all, Tangen did not look like he was far from death, and there were no signs of him turning the tables. However, Lan Sha stood at the edge of the cliff. When he thought about Tangen's subtle warning just now, he still had some hope in his heart. But just a little bit, the game ends here. At this moment, Yema suddenly said coldly. He then took a deep breath and placed one of his palms in front of his chest. Thousands of threads of silver light instantly gathered until they formed a silver ball of light that looked like a small sun. It shone brightly. As he watched Tangen fall freely from the sky, his gaze turned fierce. Die! His body suddenly charged forward, and his wide black robe flapped vertically behind him with a beep. It even let out a sharp sound as it pierced through the air. The next moment, Yima arrived at the spot where Tang had landed. He looked at the weak posture formed by the trembling arms in front of him mockingly and pushed out the silver ball. Boom! It was a direct hit. Crack, 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 crack. In an instant, Tang's bloody arms were shaken off. His chest caved in at a speed visible to the naked eye under the heavy pressure of the ball of light. Puff! He raised his head and spat out a large amount of blood. Tang's body leaned back straight, and his chest was almost as thin as a sheet of paper. He quickly flew into the sparse forest behind him until there was a loud bang, mixed with the sound of a tree trunk breaking and collapsing. There was no sound. There was no doubt that just based on the tragic situation just now, Tang Yin would definitely die regardless of whether he hit the tree or not. It's finally over. The masters of the trade caravan sighed in relief when they saw this. Of course, they were not cheering for Yima. They just felt that it would be better for Tang to die quickly and peacefully rather than suffer such a terrible beating. However, no one noticed that Yima was looking down at his own palms and frowning slightly. When he hit Tang Yin's chest just now, it seemed like he did not hit him completely. It was just a feeling of touch. It was very subtle and happened in a flash, so Yima did not dare to be sure. Moreover, he saw with his own eyes that Tang Yin's chest caved in. This could not be a lie. Shaking his head slightly, Yima easily dispelled the doubts in his heart. He raised his head and looked past the masters of the trade caravan, stopping on Elder Lei and the others. Elder Lei hesitated for a moment, then placed his right hand on his left shoulder and bowed slightly, performing a northern wilderness salute. This was a direct submission of strength, and also an apology for his previous neglect. Yima's eyes flashed. He also placed his right hand on his left shoulder, nodded slightly, and returned the salute. After all, he would have to stay in the Battle Lions tribe in the future. Although Elder Lei was not as strong as him, his status was not low. It was only right for him to express his gratitude. Then, Yima turned around and looked at Lan Sha, who was at the edge of the cliff. The corners of his mouth curled up, and he stepped forward. Now this was his prey. How dare you? Stop! The masters of the trade caravan were shocked when they saw this. Although they knew that they were not as strong as the other party, they still pounced without hesitation. It could be said that they were loyal. However, Yima was no longer in the mood to make a move. His figure flashed, and he instantly broke away from the entanglement and arrived in front of Lan Sha. He stretched out his right hand. Wait! Lan Sha suddenly shouted and took a step back. Half of the soles of his shoes were already in the air. He said calmly, "Do you want a broken corpse or a living me?" Yima chuckled, but he did not immediately capture Lan Sha. Of course, he could do this at any time. There was no need to rush. Beautiful Highness, the mission I received is that you'd better live. Yes, don't think about jumping off the cliff or other childish thoughts. At this distance, I can easily fish you up. Lan Sha's expression did not change when he heard this. He said slowly, "You're from the Bran, so you don't know. In fact, as long as the people of the Heavenly Wolf royal family want to commit suicide, no one can capture them alive." "Oh, is that so? Let's give it a try." Yima seemed to be very interested, but it was more of a joke. It was as if he was teasing a caged animal that was on its last legs. Lan Sha stood there silently. She seemed to be at a loss for words, but at the same time, she seemed to be thinking about her suicide technique. 10 seconds later, Yima frowned. "This is your suicide technique?" The masters of the trade caravan were afraid to attack, but Lan Sha was still silent. Let's not talk about whether or not this suicide technique really existed. Even if it did exist, it might not be effective. In fact, the silent Lan Sha did not even think about it. She was currently chanting in her heart, "Come out, come out. Arthur, come out quickly." That's right. Lan Sha still did not believe that Arthur was dead. She believed it rationally, but she did not believe it emotionally. Don't misunderstand, this feeling was not that. The reason why she did not believe was because ever since they escaped, Tang Yin kept surprising her. Lan Sha was willing to believe that Tang and could surprise her again this time. So, from just now, she had been delaying Yemal. "You're wasting your time, Your Highness." Yemal lost his patience. He reached out and touched the bridge of his nose. Then, he took a step forward and reached out to grab Lan Sha's shoulder. "You're waiting for something, right? Let me guess. Reinforcements? It can't be that person who died just now, right?" Before he finished speaking, just as Yemal's arm was halfway through, and the masters of the trade caravan looked on angrily, but did not dare to make a move, suddenly. "Yemal, Eunice, Sangpu, Oliver." The words were hurried and almost connected into a line. It was like a vague spell mumbled by a magician, making people feel confused. But Yemal instantly understood. His arm suddenly stopped, and he was startled. It was not strange that his name was known. After all, he did not have an alias when he joined the War Lion tribe. But it did not make sense that the names of his teammates who had been through bloody battles with him, Eunice, Sangpu, and Oliver, who were now dead, were mentioned by others. The change was too sudden, but Lan Sha's eyes suddenly lit up, and a great sense of ecstasy and excitement surged in his heart. Her position was facing the crowd, so she naturally saw a figure in the film and television space, as if there was nothing there. He flashed from the side of the forest to the front. The distance between them was not far to begin with. Coupled with the fact that he was in a daze, when Yemal recovered from the gust of wind, his vision blurred, and a person who should not have appeared suddenly appeared in his line of sight. His hair was disheveled, his face was distorted, and his face was covered in blood. He looked like an abyssal demon that had just climbed up from the ground. How could it be? Doubt, shock, and even a little fear, all kinds of emotions were mixed in his mind. Then, Yemal felt his waist and right arm being held tightly. Then, bang, a strong impact pounced on him. He could not help but fly into the air and fall directly into the abyss behind him. "Be careful." The warning came late. It came from Elder Lei and the others who were not far away. Because of the angle, they were also the first to discover Tang Un's figure. But Tang Un's speed was far beyond their imagination. When the warning came, they had already seen the resolute figure holding Yemal's body and rushing directly into the abyss. A strong wind swept past, and the two figures in front of them suddenly disappeared at the same time. Even Lan Sha, who had been mentally prepared, was slightly startled. After he reacted, he hurriedly turned to look at the abyss. In just a short moment, the two people who were holding each other had turned into inconspicuous little black dots that sank into the smoke below and disappeared in an instant. He shouted sharply, "Arthur!" This was also Tang Un's plan, a plan to survive in the face of death. From the beginning, Tang Un knew that he had no chance. He definitely could not block Yemal's attack. If possible, abandoning Lan Sha and escaping alone was undoubtedly a wise choice. After all, Yemal's target was Lan Sha. As long as what he had done before was not exposed, Yemal would definitely not pay attention to him. However, Tang Un was poisoned and could not leave. If he left Lan Sha, he would definitely die. Thus, there was only one choice, and that was to kill Yemal. To be honest, from the difference in strength between the two sides, this was undoubtedly a fantasy. However, since there was no other choice, Tang Un would not give up halfway. First of all, if he wanted to kill Yemal, he had to make him return to the surface. And if he wanted to make him return to the surface, he had to find a way to anger him. Anger would reduce a person's rationality when making judgments. Thus, Tang Un took the lead and attacked with all his might, shattering Yemal's left sleeve. Without a doubt, a normal person would be deeply affected if they lost an arm, let alone a Void Realm martial artist like Yemal. Thus, as long as he shattered Yemal's left sleeve and completely exposed his disability, it would be impossible for Yemal not to be angry. Then, Tang Un naturally made a provocative gesture and finally made Yemal return to the surface. Of course, Yemal was still a Void Realm martial artist when he returned to the surface. His crushing strength was still there, and Tang Un was still not his opponent. However, at this time, at least it gave Tang Un a chance, a chance to greatly weaken Yema's strength. And the source of this chance could only be from the cliff. The reason was very simple. No matter who it was, as long as they fell from such a height, they would definitely die. That's right, Yema could fly for a short period of time, but he was not a real Void Realm martial artist. Thus, as long as he entangled him and kept disturbing him, Tangan really did not believe that Yema could fly anywhere in this situation. Of course, to achieve this result, there were two prerequisites. First, Yema had to obediently stand at the edge of the cliff. Second, Tangan had to stick close to him. The first precondition was easy to achieve. As long as Lan Sha stood at the edge of the cliff, Yema would have to go there himself if he wanted to capture her. The difficult part was the second precondition, sticking close to him and not getting close. Tangan could achieve close combat in a mobile battle, but in fact, there was still a safe distance in between. Except for face-to-face dancing, normally, no one would like to have someone standing close to them, especially a big man. So, there was no need to talk about martial artists. It must be known that martial artists were naturally sensitive to things that exceeded this safe distance, because it meant that they could not react to danger in time, such as assassination. However, martial artists were also human. Under some special circumstances, they would not react when someone got close to them, or it could be said that they did not have time to react. In the current situation, it could only be because they were too shocked and stunned. Then, when they saw the person they killed suddenly appear in front of them, would they be shocked? When they were in a foreign land, and their past was suddenly exposed, would they be stunned? There was no doubt about the answer, and Yema had hit the nail on the head. He thought that the light ball could kill Tang in one hit. However, in fact, although the light ball was powerful enough, his illusion of missing was not wrong. That was because Tangan had used the bone shrinkage skill without delay, and a large area of his chest was instantly dented. Needless to say, such a large compression of the chest was naturally a heavy burden on Tangan's body. Therefore, in the situation where the light ball had not completely hit him, Tang In raised his head and spat out a large mouthful of blood. It was a miracle that he did not pass out directly. Well, at least the effect was more like it, blinding Yema's eyes. One step after another, one step after another, one step after another. He trembled with fear, as if he was treading on thin ice. It was not an exaggeration to say that there was a slight mistake in any of the steps. There was no need for any mistake, because Yema's existence was a real bug. One mistake, and Tang-In was now lying on the field, his body cold. Fortunately, Tang-In succeeded. Whether it was strength or luck, Tang-In finally succeeded in throwing Yema into the abyss of the cliff. Of course, this was definitely not the end. Tang-In was never interested in dying together with others, even if the other party was a void-level martial artist or higher. This was not an honor that he was proud of, because everyone only had one life. Everything was ready, and the last step was naturally to kill Yema. However, Tang-In was not confident in this step. It seemed that there was no other way except to ask the gods to protect him. Chapter 633. Sorry, something happened at the raccoon's house. Let's not talk about the rest. I'll make up the missing words tomorrow. Arthur, seeing Tang-In and Yema's figures disappear into the smoke, Lan Sha subconsciously narrowed her eyes. She was in a daze. She could guess that Tang-In might not be dead and that he might have some backup plans. However, she definitely did not expect that Tang-In would choose to die together with her the moment he rushed out. No wonder he let her stand here before. Was she touched? A little. Although logically speaking, the other party was also thinking for him. However, he was indeed risking his life to save her. What's more, he was not from a northern wilderness. He had no obligation or loyalty to protect her at this moment. Quick, capture His Highness. Elder Lei, who was not far away, was the first to recover from the shock. He waved his hand decisively and ordered, quick, capture His Highness. Yema was just a guest elder. He was not a real Battle Lion tribe member. Moreover, Elder Lay did not think that a Void Realm warrior would die so easily. After all, he could fly. Therefore, compared to worrying about Yemaw, Elder Lay was more concerned about whether or not he could capture Lan Sha. The silent scene was instantly broken. The expressions of the experts from the trade caravan changed drastically. They quickly turned around and shouted, "Captain, let's go." "You want to leave?" Lan Sha turned around and looked at Elder Lay and the others, who clearly had the upper hand. Then, she looked at the reinforcements in the distance, who were still nowhere to be seen. She could not help but shake her head and smile bitterly. The running speed of experts was not something that soldiers could compare to. Tang Yin and Yima had not fought for long. Although the experts from the trade caravan and Elder Lay's group had rushed over, it was impossible for them to wait for the tens of thousands of elite soldiers to arrive. As for now, there were only 5 experts in the trade caravan, while Elder Lay and the others had 8 or 9. The individual strength of the two sides was not far apart. This way, it was obvious that they would not be able to stop them. In fact, the current situation was more or less the same. Lan Sha only muttered to himself for a moment, and one of the weaker experts of the caravan, who could only take on 2 opponents at once, was sent flying back while vomiting blood, rolling in front of Lan Sha. Narrowing his eyes, Lan Sha, who seemed to have made some sort of decision, stepped forward and helped him up. He waved his hand to stop him from speaking and hurriedly said, "Listen to me. Go down the mountain immediately and tell Orson and the others to annihilate the 10,000 rebels and these experts. Remember, this is my last order. If they don't want to be held accountable by my mother, well, that's all they have to say. Do you understand?" The experts of the caravan nodded subconsciously. "Very well, go on." Lan Sha patted the expert's shoulder and smiled. He took a few steps back and opened his arms. Final order. Before the experts of the caravan could react, they saw Lan Sha's figure vanish from the cliff. His eyes suddenly widened as if they were about to pop out of their sockets. "Your Highness!" With a sorrowful cry, he rushed to the edge of the cliff. Lan Sha had already quickly chased into the smoke. He seemed to have seen the expert of the caravan and finally waved his hand as if he was saying goodbye or asking him to quickly go down the mountain to pass on his orders. Both sides of the battle paused when they heard the sound. They turned around and couldn't help but cry out, "Your Highness!" The royal family of the Northern Wilderness had existed since ancient times, and the royal prestige was naturally deeply ingrained in the hearts of all the people of the Northern Wilderness. Therefore, even the traitorous Elder Lay and the others couldn't help but turn pale with fright when they saw this scene. That's right. Under such circumstances, Lan Sha really had no way out. However, Elder Lay and the others didn't expect Lan Sha to be so resolute. Then, a deafening roar shook the sky. "Roar! Kill them and avenge His Highness! Kill! Kill!" After a short silence, the battle at the edge of the cliff became even more tragic. The air above the abyss was shrouded in smoke. Gusts of bone-piercing cold wind were like the cries of ghosts and howls of wolves from the depths of the abyss. However, these sounds fell into the ears of the 2 people who were falling rapidly, and only monotonous whistling was left. Because the way he jumped was wrong. Tang Yin's mouth was instantly filled with countless gusts of cold wind. It was infinitely magnified, and even the blood between his teeth could be seen clearly. At the same time, his eyes, which couldn't bear the wind, were instantly filled with tears. Together with the blood on his face, he was really in a sorry state. Tang Yin's reaction wasn't slow. His hands and feet immediately wrapped around Yemaw's body like a koala bear. He forcibly straightened his body and took a long breath. "Who? F*CK. You." No matter how stunned he was in this kind of environment, this kind of movement should have woken him up. However, before Yemaw could finish the first syllable, Tang Yin's arms suddenly hugged him even tighter. His right hand quietly shone with a bloody glow. His expression was very sinister. "You had quite a lot of fun beating me up just now, my Void Realm warrior. Then what about now? Let's die together." He instantly raised his right hand, and a bloody dagger suddenly pierced through the back of Yemaw's head. Bang! That's right, this was the last step of Tangin's plan, to use the Blood Void Blade to kill Yemaw. After all, Yemaw was a Void Realm warrior. Before he fell from a cliff, he was also in the middle of a battle, so there was a faint silver light shield around his body. Don't underestimate this seemingly faint light shield. In fact, its defensive ability was not weaker than Battle Chi armor. Regarding this point, Tang had already proven it in the battle just now. Of course, Tangin's Blood Chi was also not weak. With a series of accumulation of special effects, it was actually better than Battle Chi. But at this stage, Tangin's Blood Chi was not enough to break Yemaw's defense with his bare hands. He had to rely on the innate sharpness of the weapon, and then use his Blood Chi to infinitely stimulate the sharpness of the weapon's sharpness to have a chance of successfully breaking Yemaw's defense. So, as a carrier, the stronger the weapon, the better. Tangin's dagger, which was completely made of black meteorite iron, should be enough. But unfortunately, in order to block Yemaw's attack, Tang was forced to throw away the dagger. It was not that he did not have time to put it in his sleeves. For Tang, it was just a thought. But the series of beatings that followed undoubtedly proved that Tangin's move was wise. If the dagger was still there, under heavy pressure, it would be hard to say where the hidden dagger would stab. Therefore, from the very beginning, Tang had set his sights on the Empyrean blood dagger. Although it was not a physical weapon, it was a dagger that was completely formed from extremely powerful blood aura, so its power was naturally guaranteed. But the problem now was that Tang had not mastered this skill. At best, he could only vaguely feel it. In the past, he had countless trials, but there had never been a successful case. And this was the reason why he needed the blessings of the gods and Buddhas. If he succeeded, Tang would successfully kill Yemaw. Then he would see if there was a chance to escape. If he failed, then he would entangle Yemaw and not give him a chance to escape. In the end, they would both turn into minced meat. It was a complete test of his character. However, it had to be said that from his experience in this strange world until now, Tangin's character was indeed not worthy of praise. And now, it was naturally no exception. Bang! Looking at the blood blade dagger that instantly scattered into specks of blood when it hit the back of Yemaw's head, Twain's vicious expression instantly turned into melancholy. He smacked his lips and said, why don't we put on another show? Don't worry, I will definitely succeed this time. In mid-air whoosh, the silver light suddenly shone brightly like the rising sun. The entangled, bloated body suddenly stagnated, and the falling speed was greatly reduced. Although Yemaw didn't know what Tang was doing, he naturally wouldn't be so stupid as to allow others to make gestures on his body again. The silver light's fighting energy exploded violently, and he was about to directly shake off Tang. However, Twain was naturally prepared for this. He stuck close to Yemaw, and his bones continuously emitted explosive sounds. The vital energy and blood in his body surged out madly like floodwaters, ceaselessly counteracting the might of the silver light. If Yemaw was in his normal state, Tang naturally wouldn't be able to defeat him. But now, Yemaw's only right arm was tightly held by Tang, and he had undoubtedly lost half of his attacking ability. There was no other way. He couldn't just bite. Yemaw's best attack now was to use his fighting energy to shake off until his right arm was freed. Unfortunately, Tangin's fighting energy was as abnormal as his speed. Although in terms of absolute power, Tangin's fighting energy was still inferior to Yemaw's silver light, it was still possible for him to not be shaken off in a short period of time. In the current environment, they might have already become minced meat in a short period of time. Puff! He spat out a large mouthful of blood, and it instantly disappeared without a trace. Tang grinned. Although his bones and internal organs were severely dislocated due to the continuous invasion of the silver light, he still grinned, revealing his white teeth that were covered in blood. Ha! Stop struggling. I won't let go even if I die. At the same time, the blood blade gathered and pressed against Yemaw's back where his heart was. Bang! it shattered again without any surprise. Then go to hell. Huh. Yema Vulture's eyes suddenly became fierce, and the silver light surged wildly like a mountain. Crack! Tang En's two arms, especially his left hand that was holding Yema's right arm, immediately let out a crisp cracking sound. No, if this continues, my fighting energy might be able to hold on, but my body will collapse first. Tang En's two arms tightly held onto Yema's body, and he thought for a few seconds. His long and narrow eyes narrowed slightly. Cough, cough. Don't you want to know why I know about Eunice, Sang Poo, and Oliver? Yema's struggling body paused, and he turned his head slightly, staring coldly at Tang En's eyes. What? Tang En gathered the blood blade in his right hand again, and the corner of his mouth rose. Haha, guess. The silver light shrunk. All right, since you asked so sincerely, then I'll be merciful and tell you. Before he finished speaking, the silver light suddenly burst out. Yema was not a fool. Someone who could cultivate to such a level was undoubtedly not lacking in intelligence. Tang En's way of talking was obviously to divert his attention. Puff. Okay. So impatient. That's a very long story. Cough, cough. Tang En spat out blood, and it did not fall down, but rose instead, and most of it soaked Yema's silver hair. Actually, I killed Eunice with my own hands. Haha, that girl who loved to look pretty, what a pity. As he spoke, the blood blade broke on Yema's back again. Sang Poo too, I stabbed him in the heart with a dagger and killed him directly. While his body should still be here, but it can only float in the desert space, huh? Yema stretched out his trembling right hand, and the blood light gathered again. However, at this time, Yema suddenly narrowed his eyes and interrupted Tang En's long-winded speech. He said coldly, "You are the Gray Coat Army, the person who killed Goshawk?" Just like what was said just now, Yema was definitely not stupid. On the contrary, he was very smart, or else he would not have made the Dusk Hunter group so famous. He had seen Tang En in the Gray Coat Army's encampment before, and he also had an impression of this blood-colored fighting energy and the previously pitted dagger. It was just that the time between then and now was too long, and he could not connect the dots at the moment. Now that he had gathered the enemies of Eunice and Sang Poo, he naturally recalled these details quickly and finally confirmed Tang En's identity. Sure enough, it's you. Yema said word by word between his teeth. He stared at the culprit who caused the complete annihilation of the Dusk Hunter group and caused him to fall into such a miserable state. His expression instantly became extremely distorted, and he almost wanted to bite someone. Haha, that's right, it's me. Seeing that he had been seen through, Tang En simply admitted it. He grinned and laughed, full of evil intentions. As long as I kill you, the famous Dusk Hunter group in the bounty hunting world will be completely destroyed in my hands. Haha, thinking about it, it's really a big sense of accomplishment. Crack. Needless to say, the blood blade broke again. At the same time, Yema suddenly raised his head and roared. His voice shook the cliff, and murderous intent appeared in his eyes. The radiant silver light surged like waves, and it was obvious that he had instantly entered a berserk state after knowing the truth. F***CK. Void Bloodblade, Void Bloodblade. I can't believe your broken skill is all about the word void. Can't you F***king succeed once? Puff. A large mouthful of blood mist was spat out again. His body trembled. Tang En tried his best to press down Yema's restless right arm while he madly complained about Void Bloodblade skill. Yema's berserk state could not be understood with common sense. Tang En spat out a large mouthful of blood mist, and his shoulder suddenly hurt. He could not help but let out a scream. He suddenly turned his head, and his eyes suddenly froze. He was stunned to see Yema crazily opening his mouth and biting off a piece of flesh from his shoulder. F***CK. Tang En was not an easy person to deal with. Yema's action inspired him, and he immediately turned his head to bite the blood vessel on Yema's neck. In a sense, teeth were indeed a kind of weapon. Even in ancient times, it was an indispensable weapon for humans. But in front of him, a noble master who had touched the threshold of void level, a top assassin who had obtained the glory of 1,000 kills and whose hands were dripping with blood. Tangled together, he actually chose to use his teeth to decide life and death. It had to be said that this was also an unprecedented creation, and these actions were just the beginning. This time, Tangan took the lead. His right hand grabbed Yema's long silver hair and immediately pulled it down. Even if Yema was a void-level warrior, he could not help but raise his head in embarrassment after being hit by this attack. Then, biting, headbutting, pulling hair, and so on. These were supposed to be the ultimate skills of Shrew, but now they reappeared one by one on the two of them, and they were even better. The cold wind whistled, and the abyss was dark. The two of them rolled and trembled like this, and from time to time, they let out horrifying screams and fell straight down. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.